humans only use 10% of their brains. All right, let's kick things off with one of the most famous brain myths out there. You've probably heard it a million times. Humans only use 10% of their brains. Yeah, that little nugget of pseudoscience that gets tossed around like it's gospel truth in movies, motivational speeches, and even high school classrooms. You know the drill. People will say, "Imagine if we could tap into the other 90%. You'd be able to read minds, fly, or become a genius overnight." Sounds tempting, right? But here's the thing. It's complete nonsense. Seriously, humans do not just use 10% of their brains. Not even close. Your brain is this incredibly complex, super efficient organ made up of billions of neurons, all wired together in an intricate network. Every single part of it has a purpose. You know that feeling when you're binge-watching a show, scrolling on your phone, or even napping? Your brain is still fully active, processing information, regulating your heartbeat, digesting your lunch, and handling thousands of tiny tasks without you even noticing. The 10% myth is basically saying that 90% of your brain is just sitting around doing nothing, like some lazy roommate who never pays rent. And trust me, your brain does not work like that. So how did this myth even start? Well, no one is 100% sure, but historians and neuroscientists think it might have come from a mix of misunderstood early brain research and over-enthusiastic motivational speakers. Back in the early 1900s, scientists noticed that only a small portion of the brain's neurons were firing at any given moment during certain tasks. Someone misinterpreted that as we only use 10% of our brains, and the idea stuck. Add a sprinkle of Hollywood magic, and suddenly it became this cultural meme about untapped superhuman potential. Here's a fun, mind-blowing twist. Modern neuroimaging, like fMRI scans, shows that virtually every part of your brain has a function. Even simple things like blinking or walking light up multiple areas of your brain. And even when you're just sitting there daydreaming, your brain is running the default mode network, which is responsible for creativity, memory consolidation, and self-reflection. So basically, your brain is never idle, ever. It's like claiming your phone only uses 10% of its processing power while playing a game. It's just not how it works. And think about it this way. If we really used only 10% of our brains, how would we survive? You'd have motor skills, memory, and decision-making at a fraction of their capacity. Everything from walking across the room to having a conversation would be nearly impossible. Even writing the script requires complex coordination across multiple brain regions. So the next time someone tries to hype you up with, "You're only using 10% of your brain, imagine the possibilities," you can smile and nod and know that in reality, you're already using 100% all the time, every day. So yeah, humans only use 10% of their brains? Nope. It's just one of those myths that sounds cool, but falls apart under even the slightest scientific scrutiny. Your brain is busy, brilliant, and way more active than you've ever given it credit for. And honestly, knowing that might be even more impressive than imagining some mythical superpower sitting dormant inside your skull. Your brain is already a powerhouse. No magic required. Lightning never strikes the same place twice. All right. Let's talk about lightning, the electrifying, sky-shattering force of nature. You've probably heard people say, "Don't go stand under that tree, lightning never strikes the same place twice." Sounds comforting, right? Like once it hits somewhere, you're safe? Well, spoiler alert, that's completely wrong. Lightning can and absolutely does strike the same place multiple times. In fact, some places get hit dozens or even hundreds of times a year. Take the Empire State Building, for example. This iconic skyscraper in New York City is basically a giant lightning magnet. It gets struck an average of 23 times a year. Yep, people are walking around below thinking it's safe because apparently lightning has a one-strike policy. But nope, lightning doesn't play by human logic. It follows the path of least resistance, which usually means tall, pointed, or conductive objects, exactly what skyscrapers, tall trees, and radio towers provide. So if a place got struck once, it's actually more likely to get struck again. So where did this myth even come from? Well, it's probably a mix of wishful thinking and storytelling. People didn't have access to real lightning data centuries ago, and the idea that once it happens, it's safe is just psychologically comforting. It's one of those things that sounds logical on the surface, but when you look at nature, it's completely backwards. Lightning is chaotic, unpredictable, and frankly, a little rude. Here's a fun twist. The tallest trees in forests often get struck multiple times over their lifetimes, sometimes causing massive forest fires. And it's not just buildings or trees. Lightning tends to strike people who are outdoors a lot too, like construction workers or golfers. So the whole never twice idea, definitely a myth you don't want to rely on when you see a thunderstorm rolling in. Imagine this. You're hiking, there's a storm, and you think, oh, this rock got hit earlier, so I'm safe here. Wrong. Lightning is not keeping score. It's not polite. It will hit wherever the conditions are right. And sometimes that means hitting the same spot multiple times in a row. Safety tip: get inside, stay low, and stop trusting old sayings. So yeah, lightning never strikes the same place twice. Totally wrong. Nature doesn't care about our comfort or catchy phrases. It strikes where it wants, when it wants. And honestly, knowing that makes storms a lot more thrilling and a lot more reason to respect the power of electricity. Because Mother Nature doesn't do once and done. She's more like, I'll be back multiple times. Hair and nails grow after death. All right, here's one that sounds creepy, but is totally busted. The idea that your hair and nails keep growing after you die. Yep, people have been telling this story for centuries. Usually in horror movies or ghost stories, like, some supernatural proof that the dead aren't really gone. But in reality, it's not true. Hair and nails don't have a mind of their own. They stop growing the second your body dies. So why does it look like they're growing? Well, it's all about skin and dehydration. After death, your body starts to dehydrate, and the skin begins to shrink and recede. That shrinkage makes your nails and hair look longer, even though they're not actually growing. Think of it like peeling shrink wrap on something. Suddenly, more surface is exposed, so it looks bigger. That's it. No late-night nail salon happening in the coffin. This myth probably came from people noticing that in older times, corpses sometimes had this waxy, tightened appearance, and the nails and hair seemed unusually prominent. Combine that with the human fascination with death, and boom, a spooky story was born. People have always loved adding a little drama to death. And what's more dramatic than thinking the dead are still
alive enough to grow hair. Here's a fun mental image. Imagine your body after death as a balloon slowly losing air. Your skin tightens, shrinks back, and suddenly things that were previously hidden or under the skin start to peek out. That's why hair and nails seem longer. It's literally a trick of perception, not magic. And yes, it's also why people sometimes think other body parts change in weird ways. Decomposition does all sorts of optical illusions. So next time someone says, "Did you know your nails keep growing after you die?" you could nod knowingly and think, "Yeah, they don't. Your skin just shrinks." Science has a way of killing the spooky vibe, doesn't it? But honestly, it's cooler than the myth. Now you know that your hair isn't secretly working overtime after death. It's just physics, biology, and a little dehydration acting together to make you look like a zombie manicure experiment. Bottom line, hair and nails after death, not happening. What is happening is your body drying out and your skin pulling back. Creepy? Sure. Supernatural? Nope. Just another example of how people love to invent weird stories to make sense of things they don't fully understand.
Goldfish have a 3-second memory. All right, let's dive into one of the most infamous animal myths out there. Goldfish only have a 3-second memory. You've probably heard it 100 times. Someone tells you, goldfish can't even remember you for more than a few seconds. And you imagine them swimming around in little circles, completely clueless, bumping into decorations like tiny aquatic zombies. It sounds funny, but it's completely wrong. Goldfish have memory spans that are way longer than 3 seconds. In fact, studies show that goldfish can remember things for months at a time. Yes, months. They can learn to associate sounds, lights, and feeding routines with certain events, and even navigate mazes. Scientists have trained goldfish to press levers to get food, avoid areas where they got shocked, and recognize patterns in their environment. So no, your little finned friend isn't forgetting you the moment you leave the room. It's learning, adapting, and remembering, just like any other animal. So where did this silly myth come from? Honestly, it's probably a mix of underestimating animals and old understandings about neuroscience. People have long assumed that small creatures have tiny brains and therefore can't retain information. Combine that with the way goldfish swim in circles in small tanks, and you get the perfect visual for mindless, forgetful fish. It sounds cute, but it's scientifically inaccurate. Here's something really interesting. Goldfish can even be trained to recognize their owners. Studies have shown that they can distinguish between different human faces and respond differently to familiar versus unfamiliar people. Imagine that. The little guy swimming happily in your bowl actually remembers you, and probably remembers when it's snack time too. So, that old excuse that your goldfish forgot you, it's been 6 months since you fed it, doesn't hold up. That goldfish is judging you silently, probably thinking, finally, some food took you long enough. And let's not forget how adaptable they are. Goldfish can be conditioned using classical and operant conditioning, the same kind of learning that's been demonstrated in mammals, birds, and even humans. They can learn routines, associate sounds with feeding, and even navigate obstacle courses in aquariums. So every time you see a goldfish swimming back and forth, it's not mindless motion. It's remembering its environment, anticipating food, and maybe even plotting a little goldfish strategy to get the tastiest flakes. Here's a fun mental image. Picture a goldfish watching you walk past its tank. It sees you grab the bag of food, remembers the sound of the crinkle, and perks up with anticipation. That is memory in action, hardly a 3-second attention span.
Your goldfish is like a tiny aquatic detective, piecing together clues in its watery world and remembering everything that matters, especially where the snacks are. So next time someone tells you goldfish have a 3-second memory, you can smile knowingly and say, actually, they remember a lot more than that, sometimes months at a time. It's a myth that's been repeated for decades because it's easy to imagine and funny to picture, but the truth is way more impressive. Your goldfish is smart, observant, and probably silently judging all your life choices. And honestly, isn't that way cooler than thinking it's just swimming around cluelessly? Bottom line, goldfish do not forget everything instantly. They're intelligent little creatures with memories that last, the ability to learn, and the knack for recognizing patterns, including you. So treat them with respect, maybe talk to them a little, and know that behind those bulging eyes is a brain that's way more capable than we've given it credit for. The 3-second memory myth? Totally busted.
Seasons are caused by the Earth being closer or farther from the Sun. Okay, let's tackle a classic misconception that almost everyone has learned in school. The idea that seasons are caused by the Earth being closer or farther from the Sun. You've probably heard someone say, it's summer because we're closer to the sun, and winter because we're farther away. Sounds logical, right? I mean, the sun's warmth makes sense as the reason, so naturally distance would matter. But here's the kicker. It's completely wrong. The Earth is actually closer to the sun during our winter in the northern hemisphere and farther away during our summer. Crazy, huh? So if it's not distance, what actually causes seasons? It's all about the tilt of the Earth's axis. Our planet is tilted at about 23.5 degrees, which means that as it orbits the sun over the course of a year, different parts of the Earth get more or less direct sunlight. When the northern hemisphere tilts toward the sun, it gets more direct rays, the days are longer, and boom, summer. When it tilts away, the sunlight hits at a slant, days are shorter, and winter rolls in. And the opposite is happening at the same time in the southern hemisphere. So when it's summer here, it's winter down there. Here's a fun visualization. Imagine the Earth as a tilted spinning top orbiting a lamp. When the top tilts toward the lamp, one side is bathed in bright light for longer periods, and the other gets only a weak glow. That's exactly what's happening with our planet and the sun. The tilt changes how concentrated the sunlight is and how long it shines each day, which makes all the difference in temperature and seasons, not the distance from the sun. And get this, the Earth's orbit is actually slightly elliptical, so yes, sometimes we are closer or farther from the sun, but the difference is pretty tiny, about 3 million miles. That's not nearly enough to create summer or winter. If distance were the real factor, the seasons would be way more extreme and both hemispheres would have the same seasons at the same time, which they don't. This misconception probably came from the idea that being closer to a heat source makes things warmer. Obviously true if you're roasting marshmallows over a fire. But Earth isn't a marshmallow, and the sun's rays hit our tilted globe at different angles depending on the season, which matters way more than the distance. It's a subtle difference, but it completely changes how we understand the seasons. Here's another mind-blower. Even though the northern hemisphere has winter when we're closest to the sun,
it actually gets more sunlight overall than the southern hemisphere does during their winter. So our winters are actually milder than the winters down south in places like Australia or Argentina. That's why seasons feel different around the world. And it's all about tilt, 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 not how near or far we are from the sun. So next time someone tells you summer happens because we're closer to the sun, you can give them a knowing smile and say, "Actually, it's the tilt, buddy." And honestly, understanding this makes watching the Earth from space even cooler. Seeing the whole planet tilt and spin as it orbits the sun is like watching a perfectly choreographed dance of light and shadow. Bottom line, seasons are caused by the Earth's tilt, not its distance from the sun. Distance has almost no effect. It's a subtle, mind-bending truth that flips everything we thought we knew about summer and winter. And now that you know, you'll never look at a calendar or a summer day quite the same way again.
Water conducts electricity. All right, here's a classic science myth that almost everyone believes. Water conducts electricity. You probably heard it a million times, right? Don't touch the toaster with wet hands, or never plug in anything near the sink. Sounds logical. After all, water is wet, water is everywhere, and electricity plus water equals danger, right? Well, it's not exactly that simple. Plain water by itself does not conduct electricity very well at all. Shocking, I know. Here's the truth. Pure water, like the distilled stuff you might see in a chemistry lab, is actually a pretty terrible conductor. Electricity moves through water because of ions, charged particles that are dissolved in it. Tap water, rainwater, lakes, rivers, and pretty much any water you encounter at home or outdoors contains minerals and impurities like salts, calcium, and magnesium. These dissolved particles are what make water conductive. So it's not the water itself doing the job, it's what's dissolved inside it. Think of it like this. If electricity were a bunch of tiny runners trying to move across a field, pure water would be like soft mud that slows them down. They struggle. Add in minerals and ions, though, and suddenly the path is smooth and ready for the runners to sprint across. That's why the water in your tap or in a swimming pool is conductive. It's full of stuff, not because water magically conducts electricity on its own. This myth probably spread because of safety warnings and dramatic demonstrations. I mean, everyone's seen videos of someone dropping a hairdryer into a bathtub and shocking the water, right? Scary stuff, for sure. But the danger comes from the impurities and salts in the water, not the H2O itself. Scientists have even measured the conductivity of pure water, and it's actually really low. You need a massive voltage to get it to conduct noticeably. So all the scary warnings you hear are technically accurate, just a little misleading if you think water alone is the culprit. Here's a fun twist. In space or extreme labs, scientists work with ultra-pure water, and it can act as an insulator rather than a conductor. That's right, the very stuff you think is dangerous with electricity can, under the right conditions, be kind of like rubber. Mind-blowing, right? It's a perfect example of how science is more nuanced than the warnings we grew up hearing. And it gets even cooler. Salt water, like in the ocean, is much more conductive than fresh water because of all of the dissolved ions. That's why lightning is more dangerous over the sea, or why swimmers are warned about storms at the beach. The extra ions make the water an easy path for electricity. So it really is the dissolved minerals doing the heavy lifting, not the water itself.
So next time someone tells you water conducts electricity, you can give them a little nod and think, well, kinda, but not really. It's technically true in everyday life because our water is full of stuff, but pure H2O barely conducts at all. It's one of those science myths that's simple to say, easy to believe, but way more interesting once you know the details. Bottom line, water itself doesn't magically conduct electricity. It's the impurities, salts, and ions floating around inside it that turn it into a potential hazard. So yeah, the myth is partially true in practice, but the reality is way cooler and more precise. Remember, science is often more subtle than the warnings we grew up hearing. And knowing the difference makes you look a little smarter the next time someone warns you about touching a toaster with wet hands. Just don't test it in real life, safety first.
Sugar makes kids hyperactive. All right, here's one that's probably hit every parent, teacher, and anyone who's ever been to a birthday party. Sugar makes kids hyperactive. You've heard it countless times, right? Parents warn each other, don't let the kids have too much cake or they'll be bouncing off the walls. Teachers shake their heads at Halloween candy mayhem, and everyone assumes sugar is the culprit. Sounds convincing, doesn't it? Well, it's actually not true. Yeah, I know, it feels obvious. You see kids gobbling down cupcakes, bouncing around, screaming, and it's tempting to blame the sugar. But here's the thing. Multiple scientific studies have shown that sugar doesn't actually make kids hyperactive. Researchers have compared children eating sugar to children eating placebos, and guess what? No significant difference in behavior, attention, or activity level. So all those cake-fueled chaos moments? Not sugar's fault. So why do we all believe this myth? Partly because of confirmation bias. Basically, we notice the times when kids act crazy after sugar, and we forget the times when they don't. Think about it. Kids are naturally energetic, especially during parties or holidays. When they're eating cake and candy, they're already excited, socializing, and probably hyped up because it's a fun event. Sugar just happens to be there. We connect the dots incorrectly and say, yes, sugar did this. Here's a fun twist. The original research that led to this myth is surprisingly shaky. Back in the 1970s, some early studies suggested a link between sugar and hyperactivity, but later analysis showed the data was misinterpreted. Plus, in experiments where parents were blinded, meaning they didn't know if their kids were getting sugar or a placebo, parents reported no difference in behavior. So the myth persists because everyone's instincts tell them it should be true, not because it actually is. And it makes sense psychologically, too. Brightly colored cupcakes, fun packaging, birthday excitement. It's easy to mistake environmental stimulation for sugar-induced hyperactivity. Imagine a kid running around at a party. It's the decorations, friends, and excitement combined, not the sugar alone. Sugar is more like the cherry on top, unintended, of an already chaotic scene. There's even more nuance. Kids with certain conditions, like ADHD, might respond differently to sugar. But for the average child, sugar doesn't cause the energy explosion everyone expects. So that candy-fueled chaos at Halloween? It's tradition, excitement, and maybe a little psychological expectation, but not the sugar itself. So the next time someone says, sugar makes kids hyperactive, you can nod and smile knowingly, and maybe even drop some science. It's actually a myth.
Kids are energetic little beings by nature, and sugar just happens to be part of the context in which we notice that energy. It's one of those beliefs that's so widely accepted that almost no one questions it. But the truth is surprisingly simple. Bottom line, sugar doesn't turn your kids into bouncing, chaotic machines. Excitement, environment, and natural energy levels do. Sugar is just along for the ride. And honestly, knowing this makes birthday parties, holidays, and dessert time a little less stressful because you can stop worrying that the cupcakes are secretly creating chaos. It's all about perspective and maybe a little patience with natural kid energy. Funny how a tiny bit of sugar got blamed for centuries of normal human excitement.
Cracking knuckles causes arthritis. All right, here's one that probably hit everyone at some point. Cracking your knuckles causes arthritis. I mean, how many times have you been sitting there, minding your own business, popping your fingers, and had someone glare at you and say, "Stop that! You're gonna get arthritis." It's one of those warnings we grew up hearing, and it sticks with you. But here's the truth. It's not true. Cracking your knuckles does not cause arthritis. Not even close. So, what actually happens when you crack your knuckles? Well, your joints are surrounded by a fluid called synovial fluid, which lubricates the bones and allows them to move smoothly. When you stretch or pull a joint, the pressure in that fluid changes, and tiny bubbles of gas, mostly carbon dioxide, form and then rapidly collapse. That's what makes the popping or cracking sound. It's not your bones grinding together or breaking, it's literally bubbles popping. Crazy, right? There have even been studies to back this up. One of the most famous involved a doctor who spent decades cracking the knuckles of one hand every day and leaving the other hand alone as a control. After decades, he checked for arthritis. And guess what? No difference at all. Nada. The knuckle-cracking hand wasn't more arthritic or damaged than the other hand. So all those warnings? Pure myth. Now, full disclosure, frequent knuckle cracking might annoy the people around you. And in very rare cases, it can lead to soft tissue damage or swelling. But it's not going to give you arthritis. That's an important distinction. Your joints aren't magically falling apart just because you like a satisfying pop. The myth probably came from the sound itself. It's loud, it's sharp, it's scary sounding, and people assume that anything that loud and dramatic must be harmful. Here's a fun mental image. Think of your synovial fluid as a little fizzy soda inside your joints. When you crack your knuckles, you're just releasing the gas bubbles like opening a soda bottle. Loud, a bit startling, but harmless. It's science, not punishment. And honestly, that pop is oddly satisfying because your joints actually feel temporarily looser afterward. That's just your body enjoying the release of pressure. Interestingly, some research suggests that habitual knuckle crackers might actually have slightly more flexible joints or better range of motion, but the data is inconclusive. Either way, the big takeaway is that arthritis is not caused by knuckle cracking. Arthritis comes from genetics, age, inflammation, and other factors, not the occasional finger pop while scrolling your phone. So the next time someone tells you to stop cracking your knuckles because you'll get arthritis, you can smile, pop a finger or two, and explain that it's a myth. One of those old warnings that stuck around because it sounds scary, not because it's true. Your joints are tough little machines designed to handle a lot more than a few bubble pops. And honestly, knowing the truth makes cracking your knuckles a little less guilty and a lot more fun. Bottom line, knuckle cracking is safe, doesn't cause arthritis, and is just your body releasing gas bubbles in the joint fluid. No doom. No damage, just science and a little bit of satisfying sound. So go ahead, crack responsibly, and maybe give a wink to anyone still worried. They're just missing out on a harmless little human quirk.
Bats are blind. All right, let's bust the classic animal myth that almost everyone has heard. Bats are blind. Yep, that's right. People have been saying it forever. Don't worry about bats, they're blind. Or, bats can't see, so they just fly around randomly. It sounds convincing, especially since bats are nocturnal and hang out in caves in the dark. But here's the truth. Bats are not blind at all. In fact, they can see pretty well. So how did this myth even start? Well, it probably comes from the way bats navigate at night. Most bats use a super cool technique called echolocation. That's when they emit high-pitched sounds that bounce off objects and return to them, allowing the bat to see their surroundings with sound. It's like sonar in your own ears. Because they rely on sound for navigation in the dark, people assumed their eyes must be useless. And boom, the blind bat myth was born. Here's a fun fact. Bats actually have eyes that are well adapted to low-light conditions. Many species can see in dim moonlight, and some can even detect colors. So, while they might not be reading street signs at night, they definitely aren't flying around blindly. Their vision complements their echolocation. Think of it like wearing night vision goggles while also having radar. It's a 1-2 punch for finding food and avoiding obstacles. And speaking of food, their vision helps them a lot with hunting. Fruit bats, for example, rely more on sight than echolocation to find ripe fruit. They can spot shapes, colors, and even subtle movements from a distance. So these bats aren't fumbling blindly in the dark. They're using a combination of super-sensitive vision and echolocation to be expert nocturnal navigators. Now, let's address the cultural side of this myth. The idea of blind bats probably spread through old stories and cartoons. Think about it. A blind, mysterious creature flitting in the dark adds drama, suspense, and fear to a story. It's easy to see how the myth stuck in people's minds. Much like vampires and Halloween decorations reinforce the blind bat idea. Here's another interesting twist. Bats have a wider field of vision than humans in some cases. Certain species can detect motion better than we can, especially in the dark. So the next time you see a bat swooping around a city street at night, it's not bumping into streetlights or lampposts. It's actively seeing, listening, and precisely navigating through complex environments. That's not blind. That's elite night-flying skills. And yes, echolocation is still super impressive. Bats can detect objects as thin as a human hair and react in milliseconds. But that doesn't mean their eyes are useless. They complement each other. Sound for precision and vision for broader awareness. It's like having two superpowers at once. So, the next time someone tells you bats are blind, you can smile, shake your head, and know better. Bats are definitely not blind. They're nature's ultimate nighttime navigators, combining sharp vision with mind-blowing echolocation skills. Blind? Nope. Insanely talented? Absolutely. And honestly, knowing the truth makes bats even cooler than the spooky, blind creatures we have imagined in stories. Bottom line, bats can see, and they're not flying around blindly in the dark. Echolocation might steal the spotlight, but their vision is an essential part of their nocturnal mastery. So the next time one flutters past your window at night, just remember you're watching a tiny winged marvel that's far smarter than old myths would have you believe.
Evolution is just a theory and not supported by evidence. All right, let's tackle one of the biggest misconceptions in science that you've probably heard a million times. Evolution is just a theory, so it's not really proven. You've probably heard someone say it in school debates, on social media, or even from well-meaning friends. It's just a theory, like a guess. Sounds convincing, right? But here's the truth. That's a huge misunderstanding of what theory means in science. In everyday language, we often use theory to mean a hunch or a guess, like, I have a theory about why my toast always lands butter side down. But in science, a theory is way more solid than that. It's an explanation for a wide range of observations that's supported by tons of evidence. Think of it as a framework that explains what we see in nature and can make predictions that are testable and verifiable. So when scientists say evolution is a theory, they mean it's a well-supported scientific explanation, not a random guess. Now, let's talk about the evidence, because it's massive. Evolution explains things like the fossil record, where we see transitional species linking modern animals with their ancestors. It explains genetics, how DNA shows patterns of inheritance and mutation that line up perfectly with evolutionary history. It explains observed phenomena like antibiotic resistance in bacteria or changes in animal populations over time. Basically, evolution isn't just a theory. It's the central framework that makes sense of biology. Here's a fun way to visualize it. Imagine a detective trying to solve a case. A scientific theory is like the detective's theory about what happened, built on mountains of evidence, clues, and logic. It can be tested, challenged, and refined, but it's far from a random guess. Evolution is the detective's master theory for explaining life on Earth. Every fossil, gene sequence, and observation is a clue that fits perfectly into the bigger picture. A common argument people make is, if it's a theory, why isn't it a fact? Well, here's the thing. In science, facts are observations, like this rock is red, or water boils at 100 degrees Celsius at sea level. Theories explain facts, connecting them into a bigger understanding. Evolution connects countless facts: the shape of bones, the development of embryos, the geographic distribution of species, and much more. It's not competing with facts, it's explaining them. Another interesting twist: evolution has been observed happening in real time. Scientists have watched bacteria evolve resistance to antibiotics in labs. They've observed changes in finches on the Galapagos Islands over decades. These aren't guesses. They're direct evidence of evolutionary processes. So it's not just historical reconstruction. It's happening right in front of us. And the beauty of evolution is that it keeps predicting new things. When scientists predict that certain transitional fossils should exist, or that certain DNA sequences should be related in certain ways, those predictions are confirmed time and again. That's the hallmark of a solid scientific theory.
It explains, predicts, and withstands scrutiny. So next time someone says evolution is just theory, you can smile knowingly and say, yeah, a scientific theory, which is basically the strongest explanation science has ever produced, supported by mountains of evidence. It's not a guess. It's the backbone of biology, explaining the diversity of life on our planet. Bottom line, evolution isn't some casual idea floating around. It's a theory in the scientific sense, meaning it's supported, tested, and refined based on evidence. It's as real as gravity or germ theory, and the evidence for it keeps growing every single day. Understanding that makes you see life in a whole new light, connected, dynamic, and constantly evolving.
Vikings wore horned helmets. All right, let's dive into a fun one that's been floating around for centuries. Vikings wore horned helmets. Yep, those fearsome horned warriors you see in cartoons, movies, and even Halloween costumes. Totally iconic, right? But here's the truth. It's completely wrong. Vikings did not wear horned helmets in battle. Not even close. So where did this myth come from? Well, it actually has a lot to do with 19th century Romanticism and theater. Back in the 1800s, artists and costume designers for operas like Wagner's Ring Cycle wanted to make Viking characters look dramatic and intimidating on stage. Horned helmets gave them that instantly recognizable silhouette. People saw these images, thought, yep, that's totally accurate, and the idea stuck in popular culture ever since. Historically, actual Viking helmets were much simpler, mostly made of iron or leather, rounded or conical in shape, and designed for practical combat protection. Imagine swinging swords, axes, or shields in battle. Horns sticking out would have been a total liability. They could catch on weapons, knock against each other, or just make the wearer more vulnerable. Vikings are raiders, explorers, and warriors. They were practical people, not fashion show models. Archaeologists have found several Viking helmets over the years, and not a single one has horns. One of the most famous finds, the Juremundbu helmet from Norway, is a simple iron helmet with a rounded top, nothing fancy. The horned versions we imagine are purely fictional, a product of imagination and artistic license rather than reality. Here's a fun way to picture it. Imagine you're a Viking raider about to storm a coastal village. You've got an axe in one hand, a shield in the other, and maybe a horned helmet on your head. As soon as you swing your axe or duck under a doorframe, those horns are in your way, getting stuck in things and probably causing more injuries than your enemies. Practical? Absolutely not. Dramatic for an opera stage? Perfect. Interestingly, horned helmets did exist in other cultures, but they weren't Vikings. Bronze Age ceremonial helmets, often found in places like Europe or the Middle East, had horns, but these were ritualistic, symbolic, or purely decorative. They weren't used in battle and weren't related to the Scandinavian raiders we think of as Vikings. Somehow, over time, the two got mixed up in our imagination. And let's be honest, there's something appealing about the image of a horned Viking. It's bold, aggressive, and instantly recognizable. It's the ultimate symbol of a barbaric, fearless warrior. That's why it's stuck in our minds and why Halloween and pop culture still love it today. But real Vikings were probably more concerned with sturdy helmets, warm clothes, and getting back home with loot than looking like a mythical Norse monster. So next time someone tells you Vikings wore horned helmets, you can smile knowingly and imagine the practical Viking response, "Horned helmet? Sure, let me just get my axe cut in it before the first swing." History is sometimes far less dramatic than our imagination. But that doesn't make it any less interesting. Real Viking helmets may not have horns, but they were battle-tested, functional, and still pretty badass. Bottom line, Vikings did not wear horned helmets. The iconic image we all know? Pure myth, stuck in opera, art, and pop culture. Real Viking helmets were practical, designed to protect in combat, and absolutely horn-free. It's a great example of how myths and imagination can create one of the most enduring images in history, even if it's completely wrong. And honestly, knowing the truth makes you see history in a whole new light. It's fascinating enough without adding fantasy horns.
Napoleon was extremely short. All right, here's one that's been in cartoons, movies, and jokes forever. Napoleon was extremely short. You've probably heard people say, Napoleon was tiny, and that's why he had a Napoleon complex. Sounds funny, right? But the truth is, it's mostly a myth. Napoleon Bonaparte was not unusually short for his time. In fact, by 18th century French standards, he was pretty average. So how did this idea get started? Well, part of it comes from confusing French and English measurements. Napoleon's height was recorded as 5 feet 2 inches, but that was in French feet, which are slightly longer than the English foot we use today. When converted to modern measurements, that's about 5 feet 6 or 5 feet 7 inches, pretty normal for a Frenchman at the time, not tiny at all. Another factor? British propaganda. Napoleon was, of course, a major rival of Britain. Newspapers and cartoons exaggerated his stature to make him look ridiculous, portraying him as a small, aggressive man to mock him and make him seem less threatening. Political rivals have been using exaggeration and insults like this forever, so it's not surprising that the myth stuck. And here's something even funnier. Napoleon was often surrounded by his imperial guard, who were handpicked to be tall soldiers. Standing next to them made him look smaller in contrast, which probably helped fuel the myth. So the combination of measurement confusion, propaganda, and visual illusion all came together to create this enduring idea of a tiny Napoleon. Let's think about it visually. Imagine Napoleon walking into a room of 6-foot guards, standing on his average 5'7" frame. To anyone looking at him, especially from the perspective of exaggerating for political cartoons, he could easily seem short. Add in the rumors and the repeated jokes over centuries, and boom, you've got a legend of a man so small he needed extra effort to command an army. But Napoleon's real-life achievements suggest he wasn't compensating for anything. He was an incredibly ambitious, strategic, and commanding figure, known for charisma, leadership, and military genius, not height. The Napoleon complex idea is mostly just a stereotype based on a misunderstanding of history and numbers, not psychology. Even more, when we compare him to the average French male of the early 19th century, he was actually slightly above average. The myth of his small stature has persisted mainly because it's a great punchline and makes history a little more colorful. People love stories, especially when they involve kings, generals, or famous figures being less than perfect in some way. So, next time someone tells you Napoleon was short, you can smile, set the record straight, and secretly appreciate that history is far more interesting than the myths we've been fed. Bottom line, Napoleon Bonaparte was not extremely short. He was about average height for his time, and the stories about his tiny size are mostly propaganda and exaggeration. The next time someone cracks a Napoleon was short joke, you can smile, set the record straight, and secretly appreciate that history is far more interesting than the myths we've been fed.
Columbus proved the Earth was round. All right, let's tackle a classic history myth that everyone learned in school. Christopher Columbus proved the Earth was round. Yep, that's right. Most of us grew up thinking that before Columbus set sail in 1492, everyone believed the Earth was flat. Spoiler alert, that's completely wrong. People have known the Earth is round for over 1,000 years before Columbus. So where did this myth come from? Well, part of it comes from 19th century textbooks. Historians and writers back then wanted to make Columbus look like this heroic, brave explorer who challenged ignorant masses. Claiming he proved the Earth was round made the story dramatic and patriotic. It was a great narrative, heroic individual versus the flat Earth believers. But in reality, it was mostly invented for storytelling. In truth, educated Europeans knew the Earth was spherical. Ancient Greeks figured it out as early as the 6th century BCE. Thinkers like Pythagoras, Aristotle, and Eratosthenes even estimated the Earth's circumference using shadows and geometry. By the Middle Ages, sailors and scholars understood that the Earth was round and used that knowledge for navigation. So Columbus wasn't disproving flat Earth nonsense. He was trying to find a new route to Asia by sailing west, not proving basic geography. Here's a fun mental image. Imagine the scene. Columbus pitches his plan to the Spanish monarchy saying, "Hey, I can get to Asia by sailing west." People were skeptical, but it wasn't because they thought the Earth was flat. They were worried the Earth was bigger than he estimated, and he didn't have enough supplies for such a long journey. The danger wasn't falling off the edge of the world. It was running out of food before reaching land. Much more practical concern than plummeting into space. Another interesting twist. Maps of the time already showed the Earth as a sphere. Mariners understood how to use stars and the horizon for navigation. They weren't idiots standing at the edge of a flat disk. Columbus wasn't challenging science. He was gambling on a calculation of distance that was overly optimistic. That's where the story of his heroic proving comes from. It makes a great narrative, but it's historically inaccurate. So why does the flat Earth myth persist? Well, it's simple. It's an easy story. Kids love stories with conflict, danger, and triumph. Columbus versus flat Earth believers fits that perfectly. Textbooks simplified history for dramatic effect, and the story got passed down for generations. Over time, everyone started repeating it without questioning it. And here's a kicker. Even after Columbus reached the Americas, people didn't immediately celebrate that he proved the Earth was round. That wasn't the point. The real significance was that he found new lands, which would later become the Americas. Geography and navigation continued to advance gradually based on empirical observation, trade, and exploration, not a single dramatic moment of revelation. So next time someone tells you Columbus proved the Earth was round, you can smile knowingly. The Earth had been round for centuries before he sailed. Columbus was bold and ambitious,
but not a cosmic hero fighting flat Earth ignorance. He was exploring, navigating, and accidentally stumbling upon a continent nobody in Europe had known about yet. That's already impressive enough. No need for mythical battles with ignorance. Bottom line, Columbus did not prove the Earth was round. People already knew that. The myth came from storytelling, nationalism, and dramatic simplification in textbooks. The real story: he sailed west, miscalculated distances, discovered new lands, and changed the world. Not by disproving flat Earth ideas, but by expanding our understanding of the globe in practical terms. History is cooler, more nuanced, and way more interesting than the myths we were taught.
The Great Wall of China is visible from space. All right, here's one of those myths that everyone loves to repeat when talking about epic human achievements. The Great Wall of China is visible from space. You've probably heard someone brag about it, saying, astronauts can see it from the moon. Sounds impressive, right? Well, it's mostly not true. The Great Wall is not easily visible from space with the naked eye. So how did this myth get started? Well, the wall is huge, thousands of miles long, built over centuries, and impressive on the ground. People naturally assumed something that monumental could be seen from orbit. Then, over time, this claim made its way into textbooks, trivia books, and documentaries, and voila, a legendary exaggeration was born. Here's the reality. The Great Wall is relatively narrow and follows the natural contours of the land. Its materials, stone, brick, and packed earth, tend to blend in with the surrounding terrain. So from low Earth orbit, it's actually very difficult to see with aid. Even astronauts have said it's nearly impossible to spot the wall with the naked eye, especially because it isn't a continuous, straight line. The landscape and mountains kind of swallow it up visually. A fun way to imagine it: picture a winding dirt trail on a huge mountain. From a few feet away, it's obvious and dramatic. From a plane, it starts to shrink. From outer space, it's basically invisible. The Great Wall is similar. It's massive up close, but it doesn't stick out like a neon sign from orbit. Interestingly, some astronauts have claimed to see parts of it under the perfect conditions: good weather, specific lighting, and high contrast between wall materials and the ground. But that's the exception, not the rule. It's not like every day astronauts can casually point to it from space and say, yep, there it is. Visibility depends on conditions and your exact location. The myth also got a boost because people like to compare it to other achievements. For example, we often hear, you can't see other human structures from space, but the Great Wall is so amazing you can. That made for a great story, and humans love stories that exaggerate our own accomplishments. It's not malicious, it's just part of how legends grow. Here's a cool twist. Modern astronauts and satellite images show something interesting. While the Great Wall itself isn't always visible, urban sprawl, roads, and cities are much easier to spot from orbit. So ironically, all the human modifications we make today, skyscrapers, highways, and industrial zones, stand out more than the historic wall. Technology and development beat ancient engineering when it comes to visibility from space. So next time someone says, the Great Wall of China is visible from space, you can smile knowingly and nod. It's an exaggeration. The wall is monumental,
Impressive and a testament to human history, but it doesn't pop out like a giant white line from orbit. The myth is enduring because we love to tell stories about human achievement and make history seem even grander than it is. Bottom line, the Great Wall of China is not reliably visible from space with the naked eye. It's enormous, historically significant, and awe-inspiring on Earth, but from orbit, it blends in with the mountains and terrain. The legend persists because it's dramatic, simple, and an easy way to illustrate human accomplishment, but the truth is cooler in a different way. The wall is a marvel of engineering and history, and you don't need to see it from space to appreciate its grandeur.
Medieval people believed the Earth was flat. All right, here's one that's almost guaranteed to make you raise an eyebrow. Medieval people believed the Earth was flat. Yep, that's right. Your history teacher probably told you this in school, right? That during the Middle Ages, everyone thought if you sailed too far, you'd fall off the edge of the world. Sounds dramatic and kind of funny, but it's actually completely wrong. In reality, educated people in the Middle Ages knew the Earth was round. This knowledge had been around for over 1,000 years before medieval times. Ancient Greeks like Pythagoras and Aristotle had already concluded the Earth was spherical, and Eratosthenes even calculated its circumference around 240 BCE. By the time the Middle Ages rolled around, scholars in Europe, the Middle East, and beyond were aware of this. So why does the flat Earth myth persist? Well, in the 19th century, writers and historians wanted to make the Middle Ages look ignorant and backward. They painted this picture of a dark, primitive time when people thought the Earth was flat, and then Columbus comes along as the heroic figure to prove them wrong. It made for a neat story, heroic explorer versus foolish masses. But it's basically propaganda. The story was simplified for drama, and it's stuck in the collective imagination. Here's a fun image to think about. Imagine a medieval classroom. A monk or scholar is explaining how the Earth is a sphere, using models and observations of the stars, the moon, and ships disappearing over the horizon. The students are not panicking about falling off the edge of the world. They're learning, discussing, and maybe even challenging ideas. Far from being terrified at edges, they were curious about astronomy and navigation. Even sailors relied on the Earth being round for navigation. Mariners used the stars, the horizon, and charts to cross oceans, and this would only work if they understood the planet as a sphere. The idea of a flat Earth would have made long-distance sea voyages impossible, and yet they were doing it successfully. Knowledge of a round Earth wasn't hidden. It was practical, necessary, and widely accepted among educated circles. The myth probably also sticks because it's easy to understand. Flat versus round is a simple, visual idea. Saying people in the Middle Ages thought the Earth was flat immediately creates a story in your mind. Knights and castles and people trembling at the edge of the world. Dramatic, right? That's why it's been repeated for centuries in books, cartoons, and movies, even though it's historically inaccurate. Another twist, even when people spoke metaphorically about the edge of the world, it didn't literally mean a flat disk. Sometimes it referred to unexplored regions, dangerous seas, or simply places beyond the known map. Over time, these metaphors got twisted into literal interpretations,
And voila, you have the enduring flat Earth legend. So next time someone tells you medieval people thought the Earth was flat, you can shake your head and imagine a monk or scholar face-palming at the idea. The truth is way more interesting. People were curious, educated, and aware of a round planet long before Columbus sailed west. The Middle Ages weren't as ignorant as pop culture loves to make them seem. They were filled with thinkers, explorers, and observers who understood the world better than we often give them credit for. Bottom line, medieval Europeans did not believe the Earth was flat. The round Earth was known, studied, and relied upon for navigation, science, and education. The flat Earth story is just a myth, created for drama and simplified storytelling. Knowing the truth gives you a whole new perspective on history. It's not a story of ignorance. It's a story of curiosity, learning, and the real intellectual achievements of the past.
All right, here's a classic one that pops up in motivational posters and memes all the time. Einstein failed math as a child. You've probably seen it. People love to say it as a way to encourage struggling students. Hey, even Einstein failed at first. Sounds inspiring, right? But here's the truth. It's completely false. Albert Einstein was actually very good at math from a young age. So how did this myth start? Well, part of it comes from misunderstandings of old grading systems. When Einstein was a student in Switzerland, the grading scale was different than today's. Some people misread his grades, thought that lower numbers meant poor performance, and concluded he failed. They didn't check the scale properly. Another reason is the desire to make the story more relatable. People love the idea that a genius once struggled like the rest of us. It's comforting, inspiring, and makes Einstein seem more human. Here's a fun fact. By the age of 12, Einstein was already mastering algebra and geometry that was considered advanced for his age. By 15, he had taught himself calculus. So the idea of him failing math is just totally backward. In reality, he was way ahead of his peers. That's kind of amazing, right? A 12-year-old tackling algebra and geometry like it's a puzzle, and a teenager mastering calculus just for fun? The myth probably also spread because people wanted a rags to riches or struggle to genius narrative. It's more inspiring to say, Einstein failed math and look at him now, than to acknowledge that some geniuses were actually excelling from the start. It's a story that feels good to tell, but it doesn't match the facts. Here's another fun way to think about it. Imagine a kid sitting at the kitchen table, scribbling equations in his notebook. He's not struggling. He's racing through algebra because it's easy for him. Meanwhile, parents, teachers, and history books exaggerate a few misgrades or misunderstandings, and suddenly you have a legend of failure. Reality is often more impressive than the myth. Einstein didn't need to struggle to become one of the greatest minds in history, because his natural talent was already off the charts. Even more, Einstein himself addressed this myth. Later in life, he laughed at claims that he had failed math. He clarified that the idea was completely wrong, and that he actually did very well in all his school subjects. So it's not just a misinterpretation. It's a myth that even Einstein himself had to debunk. The takeaway here is interesting. People love to simplify history to make it inspiring. Myths like Einstein failed math persist because they create a story we want to hear. Anyone can overcome struggle and achieve greatness. But the reality is often more nuanced and sometimes even more impressive.
Einstein didn't just overcome difficulty, he excelled from an early age and kept pushing the boundaries of knowledge throughout his life. So next time someone tells you Einstein failed math, you can smile knowingly. Nope, he didn't. He was a math whiz from the start. The myth is just a comforting story we like to tell ourselves about potential, struggle, and genius. And honestly, the real story is even cooler. A kid mastering complex math and growing into one of history's greatest minds. No false failure needed. Bottom line, Einstein did not fail math as a child. He was talented, advanced, and incredibly skilled from a young age. The myth exists because it's inspiring, not because it's true. And knowing the truth makes Einstein even more impressive. He didn't just succeed after failure. He was brilliant all along.
People in the Middle Ages thought leeches could cure anything. All right, let's dive into one of those creepy, slightly gross myths about medieval medicine. People in the Middle Ages thought leeches could cure anything. You've probably seen images in textbooks or movies. Doctors with jars of squirming leeches ready to suck blood from patients. It sounds like medieval quackery to the extreme, right? Well, it's partially true, but also way exaggerated. Here's the thing. Leeches were used for bloodletting, which was a common medical practice for centuries. Doctors believe that many illnesses came from an imbalance of the body's humors, blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. If someone was sick, the logic went, it might be because they had too much blood, so you needed to remove some to restore balance. Enter leeches, tiny, living, blood-sucking tools that made the process a little more civilized than cutting a vein open with a knife. Now, it wasn't exactly that people thought leeches could cure everything. They were mainly used for conditions thought to be caused by too much blood, headaches, fevers, inflammation, and even more serious ailments like pneumonia or infections. Doctors didn't literally believe leeches were magical. They believed in a system of medicine that made sense at the time. So the idea that leeches were a cure-all, kind of an exaggeration, but it's catchy, gross, and easy to remember. Here's a mental image for you. Imagine a medieval doctor's office. Candles flicker, jars clink, and the doctor is gently placing leeches on a patient's arm while explaining, "This will balance your humors and restore health." The patient isn't thinking magic. They're thinking, well, at least this is less painful than a big incision. It's practical, if a little icky by modern standards. Interestingly, leeches weren't just medieval superstition. They actually worked in certain cases. Leeches produce a chemical called hirudin, which prevents blood from clotting and improves circulation. Even today, leeches are used in modern medicine for specific procedures, like reattaching fingers or toes, because they help reduce blood pooling and improve healing. So what seems like a weird, disgusting practice actually had some scientific merit, just not for every disease, as people once thought. The exaggeration likely comes from later writers and historians who wanted to emphasize how backward medieval medicine was. It makes a great story. People thought these slimy creatures could cure anything.
And it's easier to laugh at than to explain the nuance of historical medical theory. But in reality, it was part of a logical, if misguided, approach to health based on the medical knowledge of the time. Another interesting point, bloodletting with leeches declined over time as medical understanding improved, but it didn't vanish entirely. Even into the 19th century, leeches were still used in some European hospitals. So this wasn't just a medieval fad. It was a practice that lasted for centuries, slowly fading as science advanced. So next time someone tells you that medieval people blindly used leeches for everything, you can nod and think, yes, leeches were widely used. Yes, they were creepy and kind of gross, but they were part of a logical medical system at the time. They weren't magical cure-alls. They were a tool in a very specific medical philosophy. And sometimes they even worked. That's a lot cooler and grosser than the myth suggests. Bottom line, medieval medicine didn't think leeches cured everything, but they were a popular and somewhat effective treatment for many conditions based on the idea of balancing the body's humors. The myth exaggerates the truth, making history seem weirder than it actually was. Knowing the reality makes you appreciate both the creativity and the limitations of historical medicine, and maybe keeps you glad for modern hospitals and Band-Aids.
Ancient Egyptians built pyramids with slave labor. All right, here's one of the most famous myths about ancient history. Ancient Egyptians built the pyramids with slave labor. You've probably seen movies, cartoons, or documentaries showing tired slaves dragging massive stones under the hot desert sun, whipped by overseers. Sounds dramatic and believable, right? But here's the truth. It's mostly wrong. For a long time, people assumed the pyramids were built by slaves because the sheer size and precision seemed impossible for free workers. Hollywood reinforced this image, and it became a kind of default idea about Egypt: powerful pharaohs and oppressed laborers. But archaeologists and historians have spent decades studying the sites, and the evidence tells a very different story. Turns out, the pyramids were mostly built by skilled laborers and paid workers, not slaves. Excavations of workers' villages near the pyramids show that these men lived in organized communities, were well-fed, and received medical care. They weren't chained or whipped. They were respected workers, proud of the incredible structures they were helping to create. Imagine a huge team of engineers, masons, and laborers, all contributing their skills to build something that would last for millennia. And get this, workers probably rotated in shifts, so no one person was stuck hauling stones for their entire life. They were part of a massive workforce that included farmers during the off-season, craftsmen, and specialists. The Egyptians were very organized, and building pyramids was more like a national project than a slave-driven nightmare. It's kind of like the ultimate construction company, except instead of hard hats and cranes, they had sledges, ramps, and ingenious engineering tricks. Here's a cool visual. Picture teams of workers dragging huge limestone blocks across sand, lubricated with water to reduce friction. Other teams are carving, polishing, and fitting stones with amazing precision. Supervisors coordinate the work, but everyone is motivated, fed, and part of a big communal effort.
It's teamwork, skill, and planning at a scale that's just mind-blowing, even today. Another reason the myth persists is because historians for a long time didn't have this archaeological evidence. Earlier interpretations were influenced by biases. People assumed ancient societies must have relied on slaves for monumental construction because that was familiar in other parts of history. But careful study of the workers' tombs, tools, and living quarters paints a much more nuanced picture. These were proud, skilled people contributing to a national project, not enslaved laborers enduring horror. Interestingly, some of the slaves we hear about in pop culture may have existed, but they were probably a small minority, maybe prisoners or captives, not the main workforce. The bulk of the pyramid builders were paid, organized, and respected, which flips the entire Hollywood narrative on its head. So next time someone says the pyramids were built by slaves, you can nod knowingly and picture the real scene. Hundreds of skilled workers, carefully coordinated, living in communities and leaving behind evidence of their hard work. The pyramids weren't just a testament to Pharaoh's power. They were a testament to human ingenuity, planning, and cooperation. And honestly, that's way more impressive than the old slave myth. Bottom line, ancient Egyptians did not rely primarily on slaves to build the pyramids. The real story involves skilled, paid laborers, engineers, and craftsmen who worked in organized teams with proper food, housing, and pride in their work. The myth exists because it's dramatic and familiar, but the truth shows a level of societal organization and engineering genius that's genuinely awe-inspiring. Understanding this makes the pyramids even more incredible. They weren't just built by force, but by human skill, intelligence, and cooperation. And bottom line, the Egyptians did not rely primarily on slaves to build the pyramids. The real story involves skilled, paid laborers, engineers, and craftsmen who worked in organized teams with proper food, housing, and pride in their work.
Marie Antoinette said, "Let them eat cake." All right, here's one of the juiciest myths from history. Marie Antoinette said, "Let them eat cake." Yep, that famous line everyone associates with the French queen. The story goes that during a famine, she supposedly responded to hearing that the poor had no bread by saying, "Let them eat cake," which makes her sound incredibly out of touch and cruel. Sounds perfect for history textbooks, right? But here's the kicker. She probably never said it. So how did this myth get started? Well, the quote actually appears in writings from long before Marie Antoinette was even Queen of France. Philosophers like Jean-Jacques Rousseau mention a similar line attributed vaguely to a great princess decades earlier. By the time Marie Antoinette became queen, the quote had already been floating around. When tensions grew in France and the monarchy became unpopular, people found it irresistible to attach the line to her. It made her the perfect symbol of aristocratic ignorance and excess. Here's a fun way to picture it. Imagine the royal court at Versailles, opulent and extravagant. A noble lady says something dismissive or ignorant about the poor, but in reality, Marie Antoinette was likely focused on her duties, her children, and court politics. Somehow, over time, rumor turned into legend. The story became shorthand for the disconnect between royalty and ordinary people. More of a cautionary tale than a historical fact. Another interesting point, cake in this story wasn't actually the fancy dessert we think of. The French word used in the earliest accounts, gâteau, could have referred to any type of bread-like pastry, not a luxury treat.
Even if someone said something like this, it wouldn't have been quite as ridiculously out of touch as the myth suggests. But the drama of imagining a queen shrugging while people starved, that's irresistible storytelling. The myth also served a political purpose. During the French Revolution, the monarchy needed to be demonized to justify radical change. Painting Marie Antoinette as a cold, indifferent queen who mocked the poor helped inflame public opinion and rally revolutionary fervor. So, in a way, the "let them eat cake" quote is less about her personality and more about the power of propaganda. Fun fact, Marie Antoinette actually tried to help the poor in some ways. She contributed to charities, helped fund bakeries, and was concerned with public welfare in ways that don't make for exciting myths. But history loves a good villain, and "let them eat cake" was just too good to resist. Here's a visualization. You've got crowds of hungry Parisians in the streets, and the queen, whether she actually spoke or not, is turned into a symbol of obliviousness and excess. Even today, the phrase gets thrown around anytime someone seems out of touch with reality. It's a classic example of how myth can overshadow reality. So, next time someone quotes Marie Antoinette as saying, "let them eat cake," you can smile knowingly. She almost certainly didn't say it. The story is a combination of earlier quotes, political propaganda, and the human love of drama. The truth is much more nuanced, and Marie Antoinette's life and personality were far more complicated than a single overused quote. Bottom line, Marie Antoinette did not say, "let them eat cake." The myth exists because it's dramatic, memorable, and perfect for propaganda. But history paints a far more nuanced picture. She wasn't the caricature of oblivious cruelty we've been taught. She was a queen navigating a complex political world. And the quote? Pure legend. And honestly, knowing the truth makes history even more fascinating. It's about real people, politics, and rumors, not just catchy phrases.
The Boston Tea Party involved actual tea drinking. All right, here's a fun one that messes with the way you picture one of the most famous moments in American history. The Boston Tea Party involved actual tea drinking. You probably imagine colonial rebels sitting around sipping tea and then suddenly tossing it into Boston Harbor, right? Well, nope, that's not how it happened. The Boston Tea Party, which took place in 1773, was actually a protest, not a tea party. The colonists were angry about taxes imposed by the British government, especially the Tea Act, which gave the British East India Company a monopoly and allowed them to sell tea at lower prices, but with a tax. The colonists weren't upset because they didn't like tea. They were upset about being taxed without representation. Big difference. Here's the dramatic part. The colonists disguised themselves as Mohawk Indians, boarded 3 British ships, and dumped 342 chests of tea into Boston Harbor. That's around 90,000 pounds of tea, all floating in the water, wasted. No cups, no mugs, no cozy sipping. Just a big, angry splash. The term Tea Party makes it sound friendly and civilized, but in reality, it was a rebellious act of defiance, bold and chaotic, not a genteel social gathering. Why does the myth exist? Well, calling it a tea party sounds cuter and more patriotic than calling it a massive act of property destruction. The phrase makes it easier to teach to kids and makes the story more palatable for history books and media. And let's be honest, it's a lot more fun to imagine Americans tossing tea with a wink than with full-scale political rage. Fun visual. Imagine colonial rebels, faces painted, sneaking onto ships at night, struggling with heavy wooden chests, and dumping them overboard. The harbor isn't full of elegant teacups or steaming mugs. It's a sea of spilled leaves. It's messy, bold, and chaotic. Not a cozy afternoon stack. Another interesting point. The British were furious, naturally. They saw it as a huge loss of property and a major act of rebellion. The event helped escalate tensions that eventually led to the American Revolution. So while the myth makes it seem quaint and almost whimsical, the reality was serious, politically charged, and quite dramatic. Also, it's worth noting that tea drinking wasn't uncommon at the time. Colonists did enjoy tea, but the Boston Tea Party wasn't about drinking tea. It was about taxation, rights, and standing up to what they saw as unfair laws. The playful name masks the seriousness of the protest and the courage it took to challenge the British Empire so openly. So next time someone says the Boston Tea Party was a fancy afternoon tea, you can picture the reality. Disguised colonists, midnight raids, heavy chests, and a harbor filled with tea leaves. It wasn't a tea drinking session. It was an act of political rebellion that changed history. And honestly, knowing the truth makes it more exciting. It wasn't quaint, it wasn't polite, it was bold, messy, and revolutionary. Bottom line, the Boston Tea Party did not involve drinking tea. It was a protest against taxes and political control, carried out by colonists throwing massive quantities of tea into the harbor. The myth exists because tea party sounds cute and memorable, but the real story is far more intense, chaotic, and inspiring. The next time you hear it mentioned, you can imagine the splash, the chaos, and the courage involved. Far more thrilling than sipping tea ever could be.
Carrots improve your night vision. All right, here's one of those myths that probably comes from your parents or old health books. Carrots improve your night vision. You might have been told, eat your carrots or you won't see in the dark. It's a classic line that's been repeated for generations, but here's the truth. It's not exactly true. So where did this idea even come from? Well, it goes way back to World War II. The British Royal Air Force was trying to explain why their pilots were so good at shooting down enemy planes at night. The official story they put out, that pilots were eating lots of carrots, which supposedly helped them see better in the dark. Sneaky, right? The real reason was actually radar technology, which allowed them to detect enemy planes. But carrots made for a much more convincing and wholesome story. So the myth got tied to national pride and healthy eating at the same time. Here's the real science. Carrots contain beta-carotene, which the body converts into vitamin A. Vitamin A is essential for overall eye health and helps maintain proper functioning of the retina. So yes, if you are vitamin A deficient, eating carrots can help improve vision, but only up to a normal healthy level. Eating extra carrots won't give you superhuman night vision or let you see in total darkness like a cat or owl. There's a limit to what carrots can do, and eating a ton won't magically turn you into a nocturnal superhero. Imagine this. You're sitting in a dark room, munching on carrot sticks, expecting to see like a pilot on a moonlit night. Sorry, it doesn't work that way. You'll still need a flashlight, and your friends will probably just stare at you weirdly as you crunch away. Carrots help maintain healthy eyes, not grant magical abilities. The myth persists probably because it's an easy, memorable story. Parents love it because it encourages kids to eat vegetables, and health campaigns loved it because it tied nutrition to a dramatic benefit. Plus, it makes carrots seem cooler than they actually are. And hey, it's way more fun to say, eat your carrots so you can't see in the night, than eat your carrots to maintain your vitamin A levels. Not as catchy, right? Here's the fun twist.
Other foods rich in vitamin A, like sweet potatoes, spinach, and kale, can also help maintain good vision. So if you're really committed to your eye health, you don't have to rely solely on carrots. But again, none of these foods will give you superhuman night vision. That part is pure legend. Another interesting point: studies on nutrition and vision have shown that deficiencies can definitely impair eyesight. For example, children with severe vitamin A deficiency can suffer from night blindness. So in that sense, carrots can help prevent problems if you don't get enough vitamin A, but it's about preventing deficiencies, not gaining superpowers. So next time someone tells you eat your carrots or you'll go blind in the dark, you can smile and shake your head. It's a charming myth, but the truth is more grounded in science. Carrots are great for eye health, sure, but they won't give you night vision like a superhero. You'll still need a flashlight, sunglasses, or maybe just better lighting. Bottom line, carrots do not improve night vision beyond normal healthy eyesight. They're nutritious, delicious, and important for maintaining your eyes, but they won't turn you into a nocturnal ninja. The myth exists because of wartime propaganda, catchy health advice, and storytelling. But the real benefit is simply keeping your vision healthy. And honestly, that's impressive enough without any magical powers.
Microwaves make food radioactive. All right, let's tackle one of those kitchen myths that makes your mom go, "Don't use that, it's dangerous." Microwaves make food radioactive. Yep, some people genuinely worry that heating leftovers in a microwave is turning your dinner into a nuclear hazard. Spoiler alert, it's totally false. First, let's break it down. Microwaves are a type of electromagnetic wave, kind of like radio waves or visible light. They work by agitating water molecules in your food, making them vibrate and heat up. That's it. No magic, no radiation in the scary sense, no turning your spaghetti into a mini atom bomb. Microwave radiation is non-ionizing, meaning it doesn't have enough energy to knock electrons off atoms or change the chemical structure of your food. In other words, it can't make food radioactive. So how did this myth start? Part of it comes from the scary-sounding word radiation. People hear it and instantly think nuclear bombs, Chernobyl, or glowing green goo. But in reality, radiation comes in two main types. Ionizing radiation, like X-rays or nuclear radiation, can change atoms and make things radioactive. Non-ionizing radiation, like microwaves, Wi-Fi, or sunlight, doesn't have enough energy to do that. Microwaves fall into the non-ionizing category. Totally harmless in that sense. Here is a fun way to imagine it. Think of microwaves like a gentle dance party for water molecules. The water molecules shake, jiggle, and heat up your food. They don't explode, they don't mutate, and they definitely don't turn into radioactive particles. Your leftover pizza isn't becoming a glowing hazard, it's just getting warm and ready to eat. Another reason this myth sticks is because microwaves are fast, modern, and mysterious. Before they became common in kitchens, people didn't understand how they worked, so it was easy to imagine they were unsafe or weirdly radioactive. Add a pinch of fear of technology and a dash of misunderstanding, and boom, you have a myth that keeps circulating. Also, some people notice that metal sparks in a microwave and think, aha, radiation. But that's just electricity interacting with metal, not radiation turning your food into a science experiment gone wrong. It's dramatic to watch, but completely unrelated to safety when microwaving normal plates and containers. And here's a bonus fact. Microwaving can actually preserve nutrients better than other cooking methods, like boiling, because it cooks food quickly and doesn't require tons of water. So not only is it safe, it can even help your food stay healthier. The myth does the opposite of reality. It makes people afraid of a tool that's convenient, safe, and effective.
So next time someone tells you, "Be careful, microwaves make your food radioactive," you can smile knowingly and picture all those dancing water molecules having the time of their lives. Your food isn't glowing, your leftovers aren't dangerous, and your kitchen isn't a mini Chernobyl. It's just science in action, heating your lunch in minutes. Bottom line, microwaves do not make food radioactive. They heat it up safely using non-ionizing radiation, which agitates water molecules without changing the atoms or creating radioactive material. The myth exists because radiation sounds scary and technology can feel mysterious. But the truth is simple, safe, and a lot less traumatic. And honestly, knowing that lets you enjoy reheated leftovers without any fear. Just maybe cover your pizza so it doesn't get soggy.
Eating turkey makes you sleepy because of tryptophan alone. All right, here's a classic Thanksgiving myth that everyone loves to repeat. Eating turkey makes you sleepy because of tryptophan. You've probably heard it a million times. Don't eat too much turkey or you'll fall asleep at the table. But here's the thing. It's not exactly true. First, let's break down the science. Turkey contains tryptophan, which is an amino acid your body uses to make serotonin. And serotonin can be converted into melatonin, the hormone that regulates sleep. So technically, tryptophan can make you sleepy. Sounds convincing, right? But here's the catch. Turkey doesn't contain enough extra tryptophan to knock you out after one big meal. In fact, many other foods like chicken, cheese, nuts, and even chocolate contain similar or higher amounts of tryptophan, yet nobody blames them for dozing off on the couch. So why do people get sleepy after Thanksgiving dinner? The real reasons are much less mysterious and way more relatable. First off, Thanksgiving meals are huge and heavy. You're eating turkey, stuffing, potatoes, gravy, pie, the whole works. Large meals require your body to send more blood to your digestive system, which can leave your brain feeling a little relaxed. Couple that with a comfy chair and maybe a glass of wine, and boom, you're ready for a nap. It's called postprandial somnolence. Fancy science talk for food coma. Here's a mental image. Imagine your digestive system is like a busy office. When you eat a normal meal, the office is busy but manageable. When you eat a Thanksgiving feast, suddenly every employee is on the digestive floor working overtime to process turkey, stuffing, pie, and gravy. Your brain notices all this extra work going on, and it's like, maybe I should take a break. So you feel sleepy. Tryptophan alone has nothing to do with it. Another fun twist, tryptophan only really makes you sleepy if it can get past other amino acids in your bloodstream to reach your brain. Normally, eating a big meal full of protein means all sorts of other amino acids are competing, so turkey's tryptophan is actually blocked from doing much. So even if turkey has tryptophan, it's not magically going straight to your brain to knock you out. The myth also persists because it's simple and easy to remember. Thanksgiving is a holiday focused on turkey, family, and overeating. So blaming the turkey for making you sleepy fits perfectly into a story. It's much easier to tell kids or guests, don't eat too much turkey or you'll nod off, than explain digestion, amino acid competition, and blood flow. Here's a funny visualization. Picture a plate piled high with turkey, mashed potatoes, stuffing, and pumpkin pie. Your digestive system is working overtime, your blood is busy digesting, and your brain is sitting there like, I surrender, nap time. Meanwhile, the turkey is sitting innocently on your plate, unfairly blamed for your sudden drowsiness. So next time someone tells you turkey makes you sleepy because of tryptophan, you can nod knowingly. Yes, turkey contains tryptophan, but it's not the cause of your post-meal nap. That honor goes to overeating, rich foods, and a comfy chair. Much more relatable factors. Tryptophan isn't lazy. Your digestion just takes all the glory. Bottom line, eating turkey does not make you sleepy because of tryptophan alone. The real reason are heavy, calorie-rich meals, relaxed settings, and your body's natural response to digesting a feast. The myth exists because it's catchy, simple, and fun to tell, but the truth is actually more interesting and makes your post-Thanksgiving nap totally justified. So go ahead, enjoy your turkey, and blame the stuffing instead. Brown eggs are healthier than white eggs. All right, here's a food myth that drives grocery shoppers crazy. Brown eggs are healthier than white eggs. You've probably seen signs at the store, little price tags showing brown eggs as more natural or organic, and maybe even been told by your aunt, always buy brown eggs, they're better for you. But here's the truth, it's completely false. Let's break it down. The color of an eggshell is determined by the breed of the chicken, not its diet or nutritional content. Chickens with white feathers and earlobes usually lay white eggs. Chickens with red feathers and earlobes usually lay brown eggs. That's it. The shell color has no impact on how healthy the egg is. Here's the fun part. Nutritionally, a brown egg and a white egg are basically the same. They have the same amount of protein, vitamins, minerals, and fat. The yolk color might vary slightly depending on what the chicken eats, but that's true for both brown and white eggs. So if you're buying brown eggs thinking they'll magically make you stronger or healthier, sorry, no magic here. So why do people believe brown eggs are healthier than white eggs? Part of it is marketing. Brown eggs are often sold at a premium price, sometimes from free-range or organic farms, so people associate brown eggs with higher quality. Add the fact that brown looks more earthy or more natural, and suddenly your brain thinks this must be better for me. That's a classic example of how perception and packaging influence what we believe about food. Another reason this myth sticks around is cultural differences. In some countries, brown eggs are more common, while in others, white eggs dominate. Depending on where you grew up, you might have been told one color is superior. But scientifically, it doesn't matter. What really affects an egg's nutrition is how the chicken was raised and what it ate, not the shell color. Free-range, pasture-raised, or diet-enriched eggs can have slightly more omega-3s or vitamins, but you can get that from white eggs just as easily if the chicken is raised the same way. Here's a funny visualization. Imagine two eggs side by side, both looking innocent in their carton. You crack them open, and what comes out? Same yellow yolk, same protein-packed magic. They're basically twins with different wardrobe colors. Buying brown eggs thinking they're healthier is like buying a red apple thinking it's better than a green apple purely because of color. It's the same fruit, or in this case, egg, inside. Also, the price difference between brown and white eggs often confuses people. Brown eggs are usually more expensive because the hens that lay them are larger and eat more, not because the eggs themselves are superior. So your wallet might feel the pinch, but your health won't benefit any more than if you bought white eggs.
So the next time someone tells you brown eggs are healthier than white eggs, you can smile and shake your head. Both types are packed with protein, vitamins, and all the good stuff you want in an egg. Shell color? Just a fashion choice for the chicken. What really matters is freshness, how the chicken was raised, and how you cook the egg. Scrambled, boiled, poached, your choice. All equally nutritious. Bottom line, brown eggs are not healthier than white eggs. The shell color is determined by the breed of the chicken, and nutrition is basically the same. The myth exists because of marketing, cultural biases, and the idea that brown equals natural equals better. But in reality, you can enjoy either color guilt-free. The next time you're at the store, pick whichever eggs make your breakfast dreams come true. They're both amazing.
Detox diets remove toxins from your body. All right, let's talk about a myth that's everywhere in health magazines, social media, and probably even your friend's Instagram story. Detox diets remove toxins from your body. You've seen those colorful juice cleanses, expensive powders, or strict fasting plans, all promising to cleanse your liver or flush out toxins. Sounds appealing, right? But here's the kicker. Your body already has a detox system, and these diets aren't doing what you think they are. First, let's get one thing straight. Your liver, kidneys, lungs, and skin are built to remove toxins from your body. Your liver breaks down harmful substances. Your kidneys filter waste from your blood, and your lungs expel carbon dioxide. Your skin even helps get rid of certain chemicals through sweat. Basically, your body's a highly efficient detox machine already, and you don't need some fancy juice to do it better. So, what happens when you go on a detox diet? Usually, you're eating fewer calories, cutting out processed foods, maybe drinking more water, and avoiding alcohol and sugar. These changes can make you feel better temporarily, give you more energy, or even cause a short-term drop in weight. But that's mostly because you're eating cleaner and not because your body is magically flushing out toxins. It's more about diet adjustment than some mystical cleansing process. Here's a fun visual. Imagine your liver as a busy factory, constantly filtering chemicals, producing energy, and processing nutrients. Now, imagine a detox juice comes along and says, "Hey, let me help." Your liver looks at it and goes, "Thanks, but I've got this handled." That's literally what's happening. Your organs are doing the heavy lifting, and most detox diets aren't doing anything extra, except making you feel like you're part of a trendy health movement. Another reason this myth sticks around is marketing genius. Detox products are sold with flashy labels, before and after photos, and promises of life-changing results. People love the idea of hitting a reset button, even if it's not scientifically necessary. And when you feel lighter or healthier after a juice cleanse, it reinforces the myth, even though the improvement is mostly from eating fewer calories or cutting out junk food, not from any detoxifying magic. Also, some detox plans can actually be risky if done incorrectly. Extreme fasting, eliminating essential nutrients, or taking unregistered supplements can cause fatigue, dizziness, or digestive issues. Your body already knows how to protect itself. Sometimes trying to help with extreme diets does more harm than good. Here's a funny image.
Picture someone blending kale, celery, and mysterious powders into a glowing green drink while their liver waves from inside their body, doing all the real work. Meanwhile, the person takes a sip and feels heroic, thinking, "I just detoxed." But the truth? Their liver never needed the help. It's just rolling its eyes. The bottom line is, detox diets don't remove toxins beyond what your body already does naturally. Eating healthy, drinking enough water, exercising, and avoiding excessive alcohol or processed foods are much more effective ways to support your natural detox system. No juice, powder, or fad is going to do more than that. So next time you see a flashy detox ad, you can smile and think, "Thanks, but my liver's got this." Detoxing isn't about magical potions. It's about treating your body with basic care, nutrition, and respect. That's a lot simpler, safer, and more sustainable than any trendy diet plan. And honestly, knowing the truth makes your healthy choices feel way more empowered. You don't need gimmicks to take care of your body, just the basics done consistently.
Coffee stunts your growth. All right, here's one of those myths that probably made your parents frown every morning. Coffee stunts your growth. You might remember being told as a kid, "Don't drink coffee, you'll never grow tall." It's a classic warning, but here's the truth. Coffee does not stunt your growth. Let's break it down. Growth is primarily determined by genetics, nutrition, and overall health, not the number of lattes you drink. Your bones grow because of a combination of hormones, vitamins, especially vitamin D and calcium, and good overall nutrition. Coffee doesn't magically shrink your growth plates or stop your bones from elongating. So if you're dreaming of being taller, coffee isn't the villain. So why do people believe this myth? Well, part of it comes from caffeine and calcium absorption. Coffee contains caffeine, which in extremely high amounts can slightly reduce calcium absorption. Calcium is important for bone health, so theoretically, very large amounts of caffeine could affect bone development. But here's the catch. The effect is tiny, and most kids or teens would have to drink insane amounts of coffee to see any impact. A cup or two a day? Totally harmless. Another reason this myth exists is cultural caution. Parents wanted to keep kids away from caffeine because it can cause jitters, trouble sleeping, or increased heart rate. So warning that coffee stunts growth was an easy way to discourage early consumption. It stuck because it's simple and memorable. Coffee will make you short. Much easier to say, too much caffeine can affect sleep and maybe your calcium slightly. Dramatic, memorable, and effective. Here's a fun visualization. Picture a young kid sipping a tiny cup of coffee, looking up at the sky and expecting to stop growing. Meanwhile, their bones are inside, growing steadily, ignoring the cup entirely. Coffee isn't waving a magic stop growing wand, it's just a harmless drink at that level. Another interesting fact. Studies on kids, teens, and adults show no significant link between coffee consumption and reduced height. Genetics and nutrition are far more important. In fact, many tall adults have been coffee lovers all their lives. Sorry, myth, it doesn't hold up. That said, coffee isn't a magical health food either. Kids and teens should still limit caffeine intake because it can affect sleep patterns, concentration, and energy levels. So while it won't stunt growth, it can still make you jittery, anxious, or keep you up past bedtime. Moderation is key, not fear. Here's another visualization.
Imagine a growth chart with caffeine being poured on top like rain. The line on the chart keeps climbing as normal. Coffee's raindrops are harmless. They splash around, maybe make the kid bounce with energy, but growth keeps happening just fine. So next time someone tells you, don't drink coffee or you'll never grow, you can smile and nod. It's a harmless myth that has persisted for generations, mostly to keep kids away from caffeine. The truth, coffee does not stunt your growth. Your height is determined by your genes, your nutrition, and your overall health, not a morning cup of espresso. Bottom line, if you enjoy coffee responsibly, you don't need to worry about it keeping you short. Sleep, nutrition, and healthy habits matter way more than your daily caffeine fix. The myth exists because caffeine can have noticeable effects on kids, and it was easier to scare them with growth stories than explain the real science. But the reality is simple, safe, and a lot less dramatic. Coffee won't shrink you. It might wake you up, make you jittery if you overdo it, but it won't stop you from reaching your full height potential. So sip away. Your bones aren't going anywhere.
MSG is extremely dangerous. All right, let's talk about one of those food myths that makes people avoid Chinese takeout like the plague. MSG is extremely dangerous. You've probably seen it on ingredient labels and thought, no way, that's toxic. But here's the truth. MSG is not nearly as scary as it's made out to be. First, what is MSG? It stands for monosodium glutamate, which is basically a salt of glutamic acid, an amino acid naturally found in tons of foods like tomatoes, cheese, mushrooms, and even your own body. It's used as a flavor enhancer, giving food that umami, savory punch that makes dishes taste richer and more satisfying. So how did MSG get a bad reputation? Back in 1969, a letter was published describing what some people experienced after eating Chinese food: headaches, flushing, or numbness. This was called Chinese restaurant syndrome. Suddenly, MSG got demonized as a dangerous chemical. The media ran with it, and before long, everyone believed that MSG was toxic, addictive, or capable of causing severe health issues. Here's the science part. Decades of research have shown that MSG is generally safe for the vast majority of people. Organizations like the FDA, the World Health Organization, and even the United Nations say MSG is safe to eat. Most people can consume MSG just like any other seasoning, without experiencing harmful effects. Some very sensitive individuals may notice mild reactions like a headache or flushing, but these are rare and dose-dependent, not universal. Think of it like this. MSG is kind of like salt or pepper. Most people can use it in cooking without any problems. A few might be sensitive, but for the overwhelming majority, it's completely fine. Your body actually processes MSG in the same way it processes glutamate from natural foods. It's not some mysterious chemical trying to poison you. It's the same thing that's naturally in Parmesan cheese or soy sauce. Another reason this myth sticks around is cultural and racial bias. When MSG first got criticized, it was often associated specifically with Chinese food. This unfairly stigmatized an entire cuisine, while other foods containing glutamate went unnoticed. Over time, the idea of MSG being dangerous became embedded in popular culture, even though it's scientifically unfounded. Here's a fun visualization. Imagine a plate of delicious fried rice. Someone whispers, "Careful, there's MSG." And suddenly, everyone imagines tiny monsters hiding in the grains.
In reality, those monsters are just harmless molecules doing their job of making the dish taste amazing. Your taste buds might be thrilled, your stomach completely fine, and your body totally normal. Also, studies have shown that avoiding MSG doesn't necessarily make you healthier. In fact, some researchers suggest that MSG can help reduce overall sodium intake because it enhances flavor and allows you to use less salt. So MSG can even be part of a balanced diet, contrary to what the myth claims. So the next time someone tells you MSG is extremely dangerous, you can nod, smile, and maybe even offer them some dumplings. The truth is, MSG is safe for most people, adds flavor, and is naturally present in many foods you already eat. The scary stories are mostly based on anecdotal reports and media exaggeration, not scientific evidence. Bottom line, MSG is not a chemical villain hiding in your Chinese food. It's a naturally occurring flavor enhancer, safe for almost everyone, and the myth exists because of early reports, media hype, and cultural bias. So go ahead, enjoy your umami-packed meals without fear. Your taste buds and your body will thank you. And honestly, knowing the truth makes your next bowl of fried rice even tastier because you can savor it guilt-free.
Swallowed gum stays in your stomach for 7 years. All right, here's one of those myths that probably made you feel like your parents were silently judging every time you chewed gum. Swallowed gum stays in your stomach for 7 years. Yep, you might have heard it as a kid. Don't swallow that gum, it'll be in your belly forever. Sounds terrifying, right? But here's the truth. Gums don't stick around that long. First, let's talk about what gum actually is. Gum is mostly made of a gum base, a synthetic, chewy, rubbery substance, plus sweeteners, flavors, and softeners. That gum base is resistant to breaking down in your stomach because your digestive enzymes can't really dissolve it. So, yes, the gum itself doesn't get digested like the bread or cheese you just ate. But, and this is the important part, it doesn't stay in your stomach forever. Your digestive system is like a super efficient conveyor belt. Food, liquids, and yes, gum pass through your stomach, then into your small intestine, then your large intestine, and eventually out of your body as waste. Even though the gum base isn't digested, it moves through your system along with everything else. In most cases, swallowed gum exits your body in a few days, not 7 years. So, where did this myth come from? Well, it probably started as a parental scare tactic. Imagine trying to keep kids from swallowing gum. Saying, "It'll stay in your stomach forever," is dramatic, memorable, and effective. It's much easier to convince a child with fear than explain digestion in detail. Over time, the exaggeration stuck and became a widely believed fact. Here's a fun visualization. Picture your stomach as a busy subway station. Food and drink enter, people rush around, and even the gum, looking a bit different, maybe like a tourist with a big backpack, joins the crowd. The tour continues through the intestines past the colon, and eventually, the gum exits at the final station. Nothing gets stuck forever. It just takes a short journey like everything else. There are very rare cases where swallowed gum could cause problems, like if a child swallows lots of gum at once or combines it with other indigestible objects, forming a blockage. But swallowing a single piece occasionally? Totally harmless. The stomach won't trap it for years. Another interesting fact, the idea that gum sticks in your stomach is reinforced because it's chewy, rubbery, and doesn't break down like other foods.
It feels strange to digestive, so people assume it must linger. But the digestive system is remarkably efficient. Even tough substances like corn kernels or small seeds usually pass through within a few days. Gum is no different. Here's a mental picture. Imagine a piece of gum wearing sunglasses, riding through your intestines like it's on a little vacation. It's having a slow, rubbery adventure, but it's not setting up permanent residence. After a few days, it leaves quietly, leaving no trace except perhaps a funny story about swallowing it in the first place. So the next time someone warns you, if you swallow gum, it'll be in your stomach for 7 years, you can smile knowingly. The truth is much simpler. Swallowed gum passes through your digestive system in days, not years. The myth exists because it's dramatic, memorable, and an easy way to keep kids from swallowing gum, but the reality is nothing to worry about. Bottom line, chewing gum is safe, swallowing a piece occasionally is fine, and your digestive system handles it efficiently. It won't lodge in your stomach forever, it won't create some hidden time bomb, and it certainly won't haunt you for 7 years. So, chew, swallow responsibly if you must, and relax. Your digestive system's got your back. And honestly, knowing the truth makes swallowing gum a lot less scary and a lot more mundane, which is kind of freeing.
Cold weather gives you a cold. All right, let's tackle a classic one that probably made your parents say, "Put on a jacket or you'll catch a cold." Yep, we're talking about cold weather giving you a cold. You've probably heard it 1,000 times. Chilly air equals sniffles and fever. But here's the truth. Cold weather itself doesn't make you sick. First, let's break it down. The common cold is caused by viruses, not by temperature. Rhinoviruses are the usual culprits, and you need to be exposed to them to get sick. So technically, stepping out into freezing weather won't automatically infect you. You won't suddenly catch a cold because the air is chilly. So why do people get sick more often in winter? Well, there are a few reasons, and they're not as simple as cold air is evil. First, in colder months, people spend more time indoors, crammed together in heated spaces. Viruses love that. It's much easier for germs to travel from person to person when you're in close contact, breathing the same recycled air. Second, cold, dry air can dry out your nasal passages. This might make it easier for viruses to take hold once they enter your body. It doesn't mean the cold itself causes the virus. It just makes your nose a little more vulnerable. Think of your nasal lining as a sticky net that traps germs. When it dries out, it's less effective. That's why you might notice more colds in winter. Here's a fun visualization. Imagine viruses as tiny invaders waiting to board your personal fortress. Cold weather comes along and doesn't attack at all. It just makes your walls a little dry and brittle. That makes it easier for the invaders to sneak in when they show up. The cold doesn't create the invaders. It just slightly weakens your defenses. Another reason the myth persists is cultural memory. People have always associated sniffles with winter, because that's when colds are most common.
Kids catch a virus in December or January, and everyone assumes it's the freezing air's fault. Add in the fact that you see more coughing, sneezing, and runny noses when it's cold, and the myth reinforces itself over generations. Also, here's a funny tidbit. Studies have shown that simply being cold, like walking outside without a coat, does not make you sick unless it's combined with viral exposure. You can stand in the snow, breathe freezing air, and your body won't spontaneously develop a cold. Your immune system isn't defeated by the thermometer. Here's another mental image. Picture yourself as a fortress with a warm fire inside. Cold weather is just a chill breeze outside. It doesn't bring the invaders. The invaders are already out there in the community. The breeze might make your walls a little brittle, but you still won't get attacked unless the viruses actually enter. That's what really causes the cold. So next time someone says, "Don't go out, you'll catch a cold," you can smile and think, "Thanks, but it's not the temperature. It's the germs I need to watch out for." Wearing a coat keeps you comfortable, and staying warm might help your body function better, but it won't magically prevent a virus from infecting you. Bottom line, cold weather does not directly cause a cold. You get sick when viruses enter your system, and winter just happens to create conditions, dry air, indoor crowding, that make viral transmission more likely. The myth persists because it's simple, intuitive, and easy to remember. But the reality is all about germs, not the thermometer. So enjoy the snow, bundle up if you want, but don't blame the cold for your next sniffle. It's the viruses having a party.
Raw spinach is high in iron, but most isn't absorbed. All right, let's talk about a nutrition myth you've probably heard in school or seen in health guides. Raw spinach is high in iron, so it's super good for you. You might remember being told, "Eat your spinach, it's full of iron." Sounds simple, right? But here's the twist. While spinach does contain iron, your body can't absorb most of it when it's raw. Let's break it down. Spinach has a type of iron called non-heme iron, which is different from the iron found in meat. Non-heme iron is harder for your body to absorb. To make things trickier, raw spinach contains oxalates, natural compounds that bind to iron and block your body from using it effectively. So while the numbers on a nutrition label might look impressive, your body is only getting a tiny fraction of that iron. So does that mean spinach is useless? Absolutely not. Spinach is still packed with vitamins, minerals, fiber, and antioxidants. It's just that if your main goal is boosting iron, relying on raw spinach alone isn't the most effective strategy. Cooking spinach can actually reduce oxalates slightly and make some of the iron more available. But the biggest impact comes from pairing it with vitamin C. Adding a squeeze of lemon, some bell peppers, or tomatoes helps your body absorb more of that non-heme iron. Here's a fun visualization. Imagine iron in spinach, like coins hidden in a tough little treasure chest. Your digestive system is the treasure hunter. Raw spinach, the chest is locked tight with oxalates. Cooked spinach, the lock is loosened a bit. Add some vitamin C, boom! You've got a key that makes it way easier for your body to grab the coins. That's how you get more iron from your greens. So why does this myth exist? Partly because spinach does have a decent amount of iron on paper, and the numbers look great. Popeye cartoons didn't talk about oxalates, they just focused on the strength. Marketing and popular culture reinforced the idea that raw spinach equals instant iron boost, and people believed it. It's simple, memorable, and makes a nice story. Eat spinach, get strong. Another factor, nutrition labels often don't account for absorption. They just report how much iron is in the food. So the number on the box or in the app doesn't tell you the whole story about what your body can actually use. It's like a movie trailer that makes the food look amazing, but the reality is a bit more complicated. Here's another mental image. Picture a plate of spinach with tiny iron particles waving from inside. They're shouting, "Pick me up!" But oxalates are like a security guard, blocking your body from taking most of them. Add some vitamin C and a little cooking, and suddenly the guard steps aside, letting the iron get absorbed. That's why iron intake isn't just about how much is in the food, it's about how your body can access it. So next time someone says spinach is packed with iron, you can nod, but also think, yes, but mostly in theory if it's raw. Spinach is fantastic for your health in many ways, but if your goal is iron specifically, you want smart strategies. Cook a bit, pair it with vitamin C, and include other iron-rich foods like beans, lentils, or meat. Bottom line, raw spinach has iron, but most isn't absorbed due to oxalates. The myth exists because spinach is healthy, numbers look impressive, and stories like Popeye made it legendary. The reality? It's a little more nuanced, but still delicious and nutritious. So eat your spinach. Enjoy it in salads or cooked dishes, add some vitamin C, and your body will thank you for all the goodness it can actually absorb. It's all about working with your body, not just trusting the numbers on a nutrition label. Jack-o'-lanterns come from Irish folklore about ghosts. All right, let's get into a Halloween myth that probably pops up every October. Jack-o'-lanterns come from Irish folklore about ghosts. You've seen them glowing on porches, carved into pumpkins with scary faces, and probably heard some spooky story about a wandering spirit named Jack. But here's the twist. The story we tell today is partly true, but it's way more complicated than just ghosts. So where does the term jack-o'-lantern actually come from? It originates from an old Irish folktale about a man named Stingy Jack, not some generic ghost. Jack was a tricky guy, a bit of a trickster who supposedly made a deal with the devil. According to the legend, Jack tricked the devil several times, and as a result, was not allowed into heaven. The devil also wouldn't take him to hell, so Jack was doomed to wander the earth with only a carved-out turnip lit with a burning coal to light his way. That wandering figure became known as Jack of the Lantern, which eventually shortened to Jack-o'-lantern. Here's a fun visualization. Picture a scruffy, mischievous man with a hollowed-out turnip in hand, walking through foggy Irish streets at night. That's the original jack-o'-lantern. Not a cute orange pumpkin smiling on your doorstep. It was meant to be creepy, cautionary, and a bit eerie, a warning tale passed down through generations. Now, how did we get from turnips in Ireland to pumpkins in the United States? When Irish immigrants came to America, they discovered that pumpkins were larger and easier to carve than turnips. Pumpkins were abundant in the fall and perfect for making big, glowing faces. The tradition evolved, and soon pumpkins became the iconic jack-o'-lanterns we know today. So while the ghostly wandering figure inspired the story, the pumpkin itself is really an American twist on Irish folklore. Another reason people think it's purely about ghosts is because Halloween itself is associated with spirits, the dead, and supernatural tales. When you combine a scary carved face with the tradition of remembering Stingy Jack, it's easy to see how the story morphed into ghosts haunt jack-o'-lanterns in people's minds. But it's not about random ghosts floating around. It's about a single legendary figure and his glowing lantern. Here's a funny way to picture it. Imagine Jack walking through an old Irish village with his turnip lantern while villagers whisper, "There goes Jack-o'-lantern." Fast forward a couple hundred years, and he's got a pumpkin instead, smiling creepily at kids trick-or-treating. The story got friendlier, the vegetable got bigger, and suddenly it's a Halloween staple instead of a scary cautionary tale. And here's the kicker. The folklore behind jack-o'-lanterns is really about trickery, morality, and cleverness. Jack was cunning, he outwitted the devil, and the glowing lantern represents his punishment, or maybe his cleverness. It's open to interpretation. So the story isn't just about a generic ghost haunting Halloween. It's about a specific folk hero with a spooky twist. So next time you carve a pumpkin or see a glowing jack-o'-lantern on a porch, remember, it's not just a ghost story. It's a piece of Irish folklore about Stingy Jack, a man who outsmarted the devil, carrying his lantern for eternity. The American pumpkin twist made it fun and friendly for kids, but the roots of the tale are spooky, clever, and a little dark. Bottom line, jack-o'-lanterns come from an Irish legend about Stingy Jack, not just random ghosts. The pumpkin tradition is an American adaptation of a turnip carving custom. The myth exists because the story has been simplified over generations and tied to Halloween's ghostly themes. But the real story is much richer, funnier, and a little trickier than most people think. So carve your pumpkin, light it up, and enjoy the clever history behind the glowing face. That's the real jack-o'-lantern magic. The Great Chicago Fire was started by Mrs. O'Leary's cow. All right, let's dive into a classic American myth that you've probably heard in school. The Great Chicago Fire of 1871 was started by Mrs. O'Leary's cow. You might picture a cow tipping over a lantern and chaos erupting across the city. But here's the truth. The cow story is almost certainly a myth. So first,
A little background. The Great Chicago Fire was a massive blaze that destroyed about 3 square miles of the city, left over 100,000 people homeless, and killed at least 300. It was one of the worst urban fires in American history. Naturally, people wanted a culprit to blame, and the story of Mrs. O'Leary's cow tipping over a lantern became the most famous explanation. The story originated from a newspaper report a day or two after the fire. One reporter claimed that the cow had knocked over a lantern in Mrs. O'Leary's barn, sparking the fire. The problem? The report wasn't verified, and later investigations found no solid evidence that the cow or Mrs. O'Leary herself was responsible. In fact, Mrs. O'Leary always denied the story, and there's reason to believe it was journalistic sensationalism. Newspapers back then thrived on dramatic, attention-grabbing stories, and blaming a cow fit the bill perfectly. Here's a fun visualization. Picture a cow in a barn in 1871 Chicago. It's minding its own business, chewing hay, when suddenly a reporter pops in, scribbling notes, and says, "You, cow, you started a citywide disaster." The cow just blinks, continues chewing, and has zero idea about the blaze. Meanwhile, the real fire could have started from any number of common 19th century urban hazards: sparks from a stove, lanterns, wooden sidewalks, and buildings packed tightly together. Chicago was basically a tinderbox waiting for a spark. So, why did the myth stick? First, it's memorable and funny. A cow causes a massive disaster? People love telling that story. Second, it fits with a human need to assign blame. Big tragedies are scary and confusing, so it's easier to focus anger or curiosity on a single culprit rather than accept that a fire could start accidentally in a crowded wooden city. Mrs. O'Leary became an easy scapegoat. Interestingly, historians today often suggest the fire likely started in her barn or nearby, but there's absolutely no proof of a cow being involved. It could have been a spark from a stove, a carelessly discarded cigarette, or even unknown accidental causes. But the cow story became so ingrained in popular culture that it's still repeated in textbooks, movies, and cartoons. Here's another mental image. Imagine the city burning, firefighters running, citizens panicking, and somewhere a cow is just standing in the barn, calm as ever, completely innocent. The city's destruction is happening all around it, but the cow is blameless. Yet, in newspapers and legends, that cow became the villain. Crazy, right? There's also a bit of gender and class bias at play. Mrs. O'Leary was an Irish immigrant, and Irish immigrants were often unfairly blamed for problems in 19th century America. Linking her and her cow to the fire made the story even more sensational, and, unfortunately, fed into prejudice. Over time, she became the face of the disaster, even though she likely had nothing to do with it. So next time you hear someone say, "Mrs. O'Leary's cow started the Great Chicago Fire," you can smile knowingly. The real story is more complex. A city made of wood, Dry conditions and a tiny spark were all it took to create one of the most destructive fires in American history. The cow myth survives because humans love simple, humorous stories, even if reality is a little messier. So next time you think about the fire, remember, blame the fire, not the cow. It had nothing to do with it.
You can't teach an old dog new tricks. All right, let's dive into a classic saying you've probably heard a million times. You can't teach an old dog new tricks. You know, that phrase people throw around when they think someone or something is too old to learn new skills. But here's the truth. That's not really true at all. First, let's take it literally. Can old dogs learn new tricks? Yes. Dogs of all ages are capable of learning new behaviors, commands, and even complex tasks. Sure, it might take a little longer for an older dog to pick up something completely new compared to a young, energetic puppy, but patience, consistency, and the right motivation, like treats, praise, or affection, can help any dog learn. Age might change the speed, but it doesn't block learning entirely. The origin of the phrase is old, dating back at least to the 16th century, and it likely comes from observing that older dogs can be stubborn or set in their ways. People noticed older dogs often resist new commands or habits, so they generalized it into a proverb. Over time, it morphed into this absolute-sounding statement: old dogs can't learn. But that's just exaggeration, not fact. Here's a fun visualization. Picture an old golden retriever named Max. He's 10 years old, gray around the muzzle, and has spent most of his life lounging in the sun. You might think teaching him to fetch a frisbee is hopeless. But with some treats, encouragement, and a few short training sessions, Max starts learning. At first, he fumbles, misses the frisbee, maybe even walks the wrong way. But eventually, he catches it. Boom! Old dog, new trick. The only difference is that Max might need a few more practice rounds than a puppy. Humans also love to apply this saying metaphorically. People use it to suggest that older adults can't learn new skills, change habits, or adapt to technology. But science says otherwise. Our brains are capable of learning at all ages. Neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to form new connections, does slow down slightly as we get older, but it never shuts off. Adults can learn languages, musical instruments, coding, or even new sports. It just might take longer or require different techniques. So why does the myth persist? Probably because we notice resistance to change more often in older individuals or older dogs. Patterns get established. Habits feel comfortable, then breaking them requires effort. People see this and jump to the conclusion that change is impossible, rather than recognizing it just takes a little extra patience and persistence. Another reason it sticks is because it's catchy and easy to remember. You can't teach an old dog new tricks rolls off the tongue and paints a clear mental image. But reality is more nuanced. Age might influence learning speed, stubbornness, or flexibility, but it doesn't erase the capacity to learn entirely. Here's another visualization. Imagine an older dog sitting in a classroom, wearing little glasses, wagging his tail as a teacher shows him a new trick. It's funny, a little unrealistic, but also true. Learning is possible at any age if you provide the right environment, encouragement, and consistency. The dog might take more time, but he can absolutely get there. So next time someone says you can't teach an old dog new tricks, you can smile and think, yes, you can. It just might take a little longer. Old dogs and humans alike can adapt, learn, and grow even in their later years. It's all about effort,
consistency and motivation, not age itself. The myth exists because it's dramatic, memorable, and seems logical at first glance, but in reality, it's just a convenient exaggeration. Bottom line, old dogs can learn new tricks. Age might change how you teach them or how long it takes, but it doesn't make it impossible. The myth exists because people love simple sayings and exaggerations, but the truth is far more encouraging. So whether it's your senior pup or a friend picking up a new hobby, never underestimate the power of persistence and patience. New tricks are always possible.
Napoleon Bonaparte was French by birth. He was Corsican. All right, let's tackle a history myth that pops up a lot. Napoleon Bonaparte was French by birth. You've probably heard people casually say Napoleon, the famous French emperor, and assumed he was born in France. But here's the twist. Napoleon was actually born on the island of Corsica in 1769, just months after France acquired it. That makes him Corsican by birth, not technically French, at least at first. So let's set the scene. Corsica is a beautiful Mediterranean island with rugged mountains, a distinct culture, and its own language. For centuries, it was part of Genoa, modern-day Italy, before being sold to France in 1768. Napoleon was born the following year, right after the French took over. Imagine being born in a place that just switched countries. You've got a mix of local identity and new national influence from day one. That's Napoleon's starting point. Here's a fun visualization. Picture tiny Napoleon in a Corsican village, mountains behind him, the sea nearby, surrounded by Corsican families who have their own language and traditions. France has just claimed the island, so suddenly he's part of the French Empire, but his early identity is very much Corsican. That's a nuance most history textbooks skip over. Why does the myth persist? Well, Napoleon became one of France's most famous historical figures. He rose through the French military, crowned himself Emperor of the French, and led the country to major victories across Europe. Because he represented France on the global stage, it's easy for people to assume he was born there. It's simpler to say French than explain the Corsican context. Another reason is language and culture. Napoleon grew up speaking Corsican at home, but he learned French and adopted French customs to advance in the military. Over time, he fully embraced French identity, which makes people forget that technically he was Corsican by birth. It's like calling someone the adopted child's nationality. Eventually, identity and legacy can overshadow birthplace. Here's another visualization. Imagine Napoleon as a young boy, running through Corsican hills, speaking his native language, hearing tales of island heroes. Fast forward, he's in Paris, in a military uniform, leading troops, giving speeches. Now the world sees him as the embodiment of France. Birthplace gets lost in the legend. Interestingly, Napoleon himself sometimes leaned into his Corsican identity early in life, but he quickly realized that aligning with France would open doors. His ambition, military genius, and political skill allowed him to become larger than any regional identity. Over time, history and popular culture simplified the story.
Napoleon equals French. So next time someone says Napoleon was French, you can smile and think, well, yes, but technically he was Corsican by birth. Birthplace is a fun detail that adds depth to the legend, showing how identity, culture, and politics can intersect in fascinating ways. Here's a funny mental image. Picture Napoleon with a little Corsican flag in one hand and a French military sword in the other. He's got one foot on the island and one foot on the continent, literally navigating his dual identity while plotting European conquest. That's the reality behind the oversimplified myth. Bottom line, Napoleon was born in Corsica, not mainland France. The myth exists because he became the quintessential French figure, but his roots are more nuanced. Understanding that adds flavor to his story. It reminds us that history is messy, legends are simplified, and identity is complicated. So, while we can celebrate him as a French emperor, never forget he started out as a Corsican boy on a newly French-controlled island, dreaming of world conquest.
Holy cow comes from Hindu tradition. All right, let's bust a phrase you've probably used 100 times without thinking. Holy cow. Many people assume it comes from Hindu tradition because cows are sacred in India. But here's the kicker. That's not actually where the expression comes from. So first, let's think about the phrase itself. People say, holy cow, as a way to express surprise, shock, or amazement. You know, when something crazy happens, like, holy cow, that roller coaster was insane. The natural assumption is that it has some religious or cultural origin, especially since cows are revered in Hinduism. But historically, that's not accurate. The truth is, holy cow is an American expression that developed in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, mainly as a mild exclamation to avoid swearing. People didn't want to say something offensive like Holy Christ or other religious names, so they substituted it with cow. It was essentially a way to politify their language while still expressing strong emotion. Think of it as one of the original PG-13 phrases. Here's a fun visualization. Imagine a baseball game in the 1920s. A player hits an unbelievable home run, and someone in the crowd yells, "Holy cow!" Instead of shocking anyone with profanity, it's surprising, funny, and harmless. That's exactly how the phrase spread, through sports commentary, newspapers, and everyday conversation. Legendary announcers like Phil Rizzuto, a New York Yankees broadcaster, popularized it even more in the mid-20th century. Now, don't get me wrong. Cows are sacred in Hinduism, and you'll hear plenty of people in India and around the world showing respect for cows. But the English language exclamation, "Holy cow," doesn't directly come from that religious tradition. It's more of a coincidence that cows are important in Hindu culture. The phrase's origin is linguistic creativity in American English, not cultural borrowing. Why does the myth persist? Probably because it's a really neat story. People love connecting everyday phrases to exotic or ancient origins. It's simple and memorable. Oh, cows are sacred in India, so holy cow must come from there. It makes sense at a glance, even if the history tells a different story. Here's a funny way to picture it. Imagine a person in 1920s New York walking down the street, sees something shocking and blurts out, "Holy cow!"
A cow just happens to be in a nearby barn in India, completely unaware of this exclamation half a world away. The cow probably wouldn't care, but humans made the phrase stick anyway. That's the humor in how myths form around words. Another interesting note, English speakers have always had a habit of creating mild oaths or safe substitutions for stronger language. Think gosh instead of God, or jeepers instead of Jesus. Holy cow fits perfectly in this tradition. It's expressive, fun to say, and completely safe to shout in front of grandma. So next time someone exclaims, "Holy cow," you can smile and know the truth. It didn't come from Hinduism, and it's not some deep spiritual reference. It's just a clever, historically American way to express surprise without offending anyone. A linguistic safety net that stuck for over a century. Bottom line, holy cow comes from American slang, not Hindu tradition. The myth exists because it's easy to connect words to exotic ideas. But language often evolves in ways that are simpler, funnier, and more accidental than we expect. So next time you're shocked and shout it out, know you're continuing a long, quirky American tradition of polite exclamations, no sacred cows required.
Vikings discovered America before Columbus. They landed in Newfoundland, yes, but it wasn't widely known. All right, let's tackle a history myth that gets a lot of people confused. Vikings discovered America before Columbus. You've probably heard someone say it proudly, like, well, Columbus wasn't the first. And yes, technically, it's kind of true, but also kind of misleading. Let's break it down. So first, the basics. Around the year 1000 AD, a group of Vikings, led by a guy named Leif Erikson, sailed west from Greenland and landed on the northeastern coast of what we now call Canada, specifically an area known today as Newfoundland. They called it Vinland, likely because of the wild grapes they found there. That's right, almost 500 years before Columbus set foot in the Caribbean, Vikings had already been there. Here's a fun visualization. Picture longboats slicing through icy North Atlantic waves, with Vikings wearing helmets and fur, shouting orders and navigating using the sun, stars, and maybe some serious Viking intuition. They reach a strange forested land, think, this is nice, and set up temporary settlements. But here's the catch. These Viking colonies were small, short-lived, and mostly unknown to the rest of the world at the time. So why do people still give Columbus the title of Discoverer of America? That's because Columbus's voyages had global impact. When he arrived in 1492, he opened the door for large-scale European exploration, colonization, and trade in the Americas. The Viking landings, impressive as they were, didn't really change world history. They didn't establish permanent settlements, spark trade networks, or influence Europe's perception of the continent. In other words, they were cool explorers, but mostly forgotten ones. Here's another way to picture it. Imagine you find a secret beach first, explore it for a week, and leave. Then, years later, someone else arrives, builds a city, and tells everyone about it. Who do people remember? The first person or the one whose actions reshaped history? That's why Columbus gets the credit in popular imagination. Interestingly, evidence of Viking presence in Newfoundland was rediscovered in the 1960s at a site called L'Anse aux Meadows. Archaeologists found remnants of Viking-style buildings, tools, and artifacts, proof that they really were there. This finally confirmed what the sagas had hinted at for centuries. Vikings reached North America long before Columbus, but the knowledge was lost in history for hundreds of years. So, why does the myth get twisted? Many people take the statement Vikings discovered America and assume it means Europeans knew about America and started colonization. But the reality is more nuanced. Yes, Vikings arrived first, but it didn't lead to widespread knowledge or permanent settlement. Columbus gets remembered because he arrived and did exactly that. Here's a funny mental image. Vikings land on a snowy Newfoundland shore, build some huts, fish a bit, maybe enjoy some grapes, and then leave. They probably think, nice trip. Meanwhile, Europe carries on without knowing a thing. Fast forward 500 years, Columbus sails in, waves to the locals, and suddenly the world's paying attention. The first arrival, not nearly as famous as the second one. So next time someone brags about Vikings discovering America, you can nod, but also remember the full story. The Vikings were indeed first, but their impact was tiny compared to Columbus. The myth persists because it's simpler to say Vikings beat Columbus rather than explaining centuries of forgotten settlements and historical impact. So, bottom line, Vikings reached Newfoundland around 1000 AD, but it didn't spark widespread awareness or colonization. Columbus gets credit because he changed world history. The myth exists because people love the drama of who was first, but history is more about influence and legacy than just footprints on a shore. So, yes, the Vikings were there first, but history remembers the one who made the world notice.
The word myth means false story. It originally meant a traditional story. All right, let's bust a word myth that's sneaky because it's hiding in plain sight. The word myth means a false story. You've probably heard someone say, "That's just a myth," and assumed it means it's not true. But here's the twist. Historically, that's not what the word actually meant. The word myth comes from the Greek word mythos, which originally meant a story, a narrative, or a traditional tale that explains something about the world, human behavior, or the divine. These myths were the way ancient people made sense of life, nature, and the cosmos. Think about stories like Zeus throwing thunderbolts, or how the seasons were explained through Persephone's journey. These were not necessarily false in the way we think of false today. They were meaningful cultural narratives, often passed down orally for generations. Here's a fun visualization. Imagine you're an ancient Greek, sitting around a fire. Your grandma tells you a story about the gods, how the seasons change because of a goddess named Persephone, and why winter is cold. You don't say, "That's fake." You say, "Ah, that explains it." Because myths were a way to understand the world before science came along. They carried lessons, morals, and a sense of wonder. Over time, especially in modern English, the word myth got a new twist. People started using it to mean something false or widely misunderstood. For example, it's a myth that bats are blind, or it's a myth that we only use 10% of our brains. And that's how the word became linked to falsehood or debunked ideas. The original sense, traditional story or cultural narrative, was slowly overshadowed. Why does this matter? Because using the word myth incorrectly can make us dismiss important cultural stories and wisdom. A myth isn't automatically a lie. It's a story that held meaning for a culture at a certain time. It's like saying, "That story is irrelevant," instead of saying, "That story is false." Big difference. Here's another visualization. Imagine telling a friend, "That's just a myth," about an ancient tale. They might hear it as, "That never happened," when really you mean, "It's a story from long ago that explains something important." The word's meaning has shifted, and now we often confuse myth with fake news, which is kind of funny when you think about it. Another interesting point: many myths were metaphorical, symbolic, or allegorical. They weren't meant to be taken literally, but they conveyed truths about life, human nature, or moral lessons. For instance, the story of Icarus flying too close to the sun isn't literally about wings melting. It's a cautionary tale about over-ambition. Calling it false misses the deeper lesson. So next time you hear someone say, "That's just a myth," remember, originally, myths weren't about falsehood at all. They were traditional stories that carried meaning, culture, and explanation before we had science, history, or modern logic. The modern usage, linking myth to falsehood, is just a shortcut that makes it easier to dismiss things, but it erases the richness of what myths really were. Here's a funny mental image. Picture ancient Greeks sitting around telling epic stories about gods, monsters, and heroes. They laugh, gasp, and learn life lessons, all perfectly serious to them. Fast forward 2,500 years, and someone shrugs and says, "Yeah, that's a myth," meaning, that's not true. It's like flattening an epic movie into a one-word shrug. Kinda sad, right? Bottom line, the word myth originally meant a traditional story, not a false story. Modern usage twisted it into something false. But if we go back to the roots, myths are about cultural meaning, lessons, and imagination, not literal truth. So next time someone calls something a myth, you can smile and think, well, it's a story that might carry a lot more wisdom than you realize.
Sugar causes cavities directly. It's bacteria, not sugar itself. Okay, let's dive into a dental myth that almost everyone believes. Sugar directly causes cavities. You've probably heard it since childhood. Parents, teachers, dentists, all warning, don't eat too much candy or you'll get cavities. Sounds simple, right? Sugar bad, cavities happen. But here's the twist. Sugar doesn't directly rot your teeth. It's actually the bacteria in your mouth that do the damage. Let's break it down. Our mouths are full of bacteria, thousands of different types, living on our teeth, gums, and tongue. Most of them are harmless, some are even helpful, but a few love to party on sugar. When you eat sugary foods, bacteria feed on those sugars and produce acid as a byproduct. That acid then eats away at your tooth enamel, creating holes we call cavities. So really, sugar is fuel for bacteria, not the direct villain. Here's a fun visualization. Picture your mouth like a tiny city. There are citizens, the harmless bacteria, workers, your saliva cleaning things up, and a few troublemakers, the cavity-causing bacteria. You toss candy into the city, the troublemakers chow down and start throwing acid bombs at your teeth. The candy itself didn't attack the buildings, it just powered the troublemakers. That's sugar's role in cavities. So why does everyone blame sugar directly? Well, it's simple and memorable. Telling kids sugar causes cavities is easier than explaining the complex ecosystem of bacteria, acids, and enamel. And it works as a behavioral shortcut. Kids avoid candy because they want to avoid cavities. But scientifically, it's not sugar alone. You could eat candy and rinse your mouth immediately, and the risk would be lower than leaving sugar on your teeth for hours. Here's another way to picture it. Imagine leaving a cookie on your kitchen counter for a week. If you don't clean up, mold grows. Did the cookie create the mold by itself? Nope. The mold spores were always there. They just had food to thrive on. Same concept in your mouth. Sugar feeds bacteria. Bacteria create acid. Acid damages enamel. The sugar is just the catalyst. Interestingly, this distinction explains why some foods are worse for your teeth than others. Sticky candy, dried fruit, or sugary drinks linger on teeth and give bacteria a long buffet. A chocolate bar, eaten quickly and followed by water or brushing, doesn't give bacteria as much time to cause harm. It's all about exposure and timing, not sugar being inherently evil. Another point, saliva is a superhero in all of this. It helps neutralize acid, wash away food particles, and repair early enamel damage. So your body has natural defenses, meaning cavities don't form automatically just because you eat sugar. It's the combination of sugar, bacterial activity, and poor dental hygiene that leads to problems. Here's a funny mental image. Picture tiny bacteria at a candy buffet inside your mouth, partying hard, making acid bombs, while saliva plays the role of security, trying to calm the chaos. If you brush, floss, or rinse, you're basically sending in reinforcements to restore order. The sugar? Just party snacks for the troublemakers. So next time someone says sugar causes cavities, you can nod, but also smile knowingly. It's not the sugar itself, but what it does for the bacteria that counts. Sugar's the accomplice, not the criminal. Understanding this helps us focus on dental hygiene and moderation rather than demonizing candy outright. Bottom line, cavities are caused by bacterial acid, not sugar itself. Sugar just feeds the troublemakers.
Brush, floss, and rinse, and you can enjoy your sweets with far less worry. The myth sticks because it's simple and scary, but the real story is a lot more interesting and way more microscopic than most people imagine.
Shaving makes hair grow back thicker. All right, let's tackle a personal grooming myth that almost everyone has heard at some point. Shaving makes your hair grow back thicker. You've probably been warned as a kid, don't shave your legs yet. It'll come back all thick and dark. But here's the truth. Shaving has zero effect on hair thickness, color, or growth rate. So how did this myth start? Well, it's mostly about perception. When you shave, the razor cuts the hair at the surface of your skin. This leaves a blunt edge instead of the natural tapered tip hair normally has. When the hair starts growing back, it looks darker, feels coarser, and seems more noticeable, especially at first. That's it. Your hair isn't actually thicker, it just feels that way temporarily. Here's a visualization. Picture a freshly shaved leg. Each hair is like a tiny pencil stub, blunt on the top. As it grows out, it feels rougher to the touch and seems darker because you're seeing the wider cross-section instead of a tapered tip. The hair itself hasn't changed at all. It's just your perception that tricks you into thinking it's thicker. Another factor is age and hormonal changes. Kids, teenagers, and even adults naturally experience hair growth changes over time. If someone starts shaving around puberty, hair might appear darker or coarser anyway, but that's due to natural development, not shaving itself. Humans just love to blame the razor for changes that are actually biological. Interestingly, the myth persists because shaving is so visible and tactile. Every time you shave, you feel the hair growing back and notice it immediately. Our brains are pattern-seeking machines, so it's easy to connect cause and effect, even when there's none. I shaved, now my hair is thicker. Except what's really happening is that blunt, growing hair just feels different. Here's a fun mental image. Imagine a tiny army of hairs on your arm. You shave them down, leaving blunt stubs. When they grow back, they stand up a little straighter, feeling like little soldiers in formation, all thick and strong. But in reality, they're exactly the same hairs as before, just freshly cut. Your brain exaggerates the effect, and voila, myth born. And it's not just legs. Facial hair, arm hair, chest hair is the same story. Any shaving area will give the same temporary blunt effect, which people interpret as new thickness or coarseness. But scientifically, razors can't change follicle biology. Follicles determine thickness, growth rate, and color, and shaving doesn't touch the follicle. If you really want to change hair growth, you'd need methods that affect the follicle itself, like laser hair removal or certain medications, not a razor. Shaving is just surface level, a cosmetic change that affects perception, not biology. So next time someone warns you that shaving makes hair thicker, you can smile and reassure them, it's just a visual trick, not a real change. Your hair grows back the same as it always would. It just feels and looks different at first because of the blunt cut. Bottom line, shaving does not make hair thicker, darker, or faster growing. It only appears that way temporarily because of the blunt edge.
The myth persists because it's intuitive and easy to notice, but science and observation prove it's just a matter of perception. So go ahead, shave freely, and don't fear the hair coming back like a raging forest. It's the same hair you had all along.
Camels store water in their humps. All right, let's tackle one of those classic animal myths. Camels store water in their humps. Yep, almost everyone has heard it. School books, cartoons, documentaries, they all show camels with humps full of water. But here's the surprise. That's not how it actually works. So, first off, what's really in a camel's hump? Fat. That's right, pure fat, packed into a tall, wobbly storage unit on their backs. It's not a water tank. The fat serves as an energy reserve for when food is scarce. In harsh desert environments, camels can go for days or even weeks without food, and their humps give them the fuel they need to survive. Here's a fun visualization. Imagine a camel in the middle of a scorching desert. It's not sipping water from its hump. Instead, it's slowly burning the fat stored in that hump for energy. As the fat is metabolized, it produces water indirectly through chemical reactions in the body. So, technically, camels can get some water from fat breakdown, but the hump isn't filled with H2O waiting for a drink. It's like calling a packed lunch a water bottle just because it contains juicy food. So, why does this myth persist? Well, the hump does change when camels are hungry or thirsty. When a camel goes without food for a while, its hump shrinks and droops. People who see this might think the hump is emptying, and they naturally assume water is being used up. It's a logical leap, but it's wrong. The shrinkage is due to fat being metabolized, not water being drained. Another interesting fact, camels are incredibly well adapted to survive without frequent water. They have specialized blood cells that allow them to handle dehydration, and they can drink huge amounts in one go when water is available. Some camels can drink up to 40 liters in a single session. But even with all that water, it's never stored in the hump. It goes into their bloodstream and tissues, not their fat pads. Here's a funny mental image. Picture a camel walking through the desert, tourists staring in amazement, and someone whispers, "Look, water in the hump." Meanwhile, the camel's just thinking, "Yeah, sure, just fat up here, buddy." The hump wobbles, shrinks, or stands tall, but it's all energy storage, not a built-in camel water bottle TM. So, what about those times you hear that camels can survive weeks without water? That's true. But again, it's not because of the hump acting like a tank. It's because camels are incredibly efficient at conserving water, minimizing sweat, and tolerating dehydration. Their humps just provide energy during long journeys when food is scarce, helpful, but not a water reservoir. Even more fascinating, when a camel does drink, it can refill its body with water really quickly. It's like a sponge, absorbing water into its bloodstream and tissues, not stuffing it into the hump. The hump remains primarily fat, tall, wobbly, and oddly iconic, but still just fat. So next time someone tells you camels store water in their humps, you can smile and think, well, not exactly. It's a myth that makes sense on the surface. Humps shrink when camels are hungry or thirsty, but the science is way cooler than the story. Fat, metabolism, and dehydration adaptation, that's real desert magic. Bottom line, Camels do not store water in their humps. The humps are fat storage, which can indirectly help produce water through metabolism, but they're not literal water tanks. Camels survive desert heat thanks to specialized biology and amazing efficiency, not because of a liquid-filled hump. So next time you picture a camel drinking from its own hump, imagine it smiling smugly, fat intact, knowing it's way smarter than that myth suggests.